Do Hwan opened his eyes and saw a wooden ceiling, old planks, gaps between them. The straw beneath his back pricked his skin. Above him, a thin woman with cracked hands was sobbing. She pressed his head to her chest and rocked back and forth like a pendulum. Standing nearby was an old man in a rumpled robe, reading something from a yellow scroll. His voice was even and indifferent, like that of a notary reading a will aloud. Do Hwan didn't understand the words at first. Then he did. Memories of a stranger's body flooded his mind in jagged fragments. The village of Pyeongchon, the temple on the outskirts, the sealing ritual, his 15th birthday. The boy stood before the altar, waiting for his class to be announced. Fire Knight, or Battle Mage, or at least a Pathfinder. Anything. Just not what he'd drawn. The seal on his left forearm turned black. The elder recoiled. His mother screamed. The priest covered his face with his hands. Necromancer, the very lowest of the low. Only a grave worm is filthier. The elder read out the sentence. Exile for 3 days. Stripping of the family name. A ban on returning. Do Hwan lay on the straw and listened to the sobs of the woman whom this body's memory called Mom. He blinked, raised his hand, looked at his slender fingers. A child's fingers, 15 years old. He remembered a sheet of corrugated metal flying off the roof. He remembered the intern's face. He read the blow, then darkness, then this ceiling. So he died. He definitely died. And now he's here, in the body of a boy who's being driven out of his home village because magic decided to make him a necromancer. Do Hwan sat up. His mother clutched his sleeve. The elder fell silent mid-sentence. Do Hwan looked at his left hand. A black seal. A skull with intertwined bones. A beautiful design, come to think of it. He listened to himself. Somewhere inside, something new was pulsing. Dark and cold. Mana. A stranger's memory suggested the word. A necromancer raises the dead, brings skeletons to life, forces them to move and obey commands. By local standards, it's an abomination, a weapon of war, a curse. Before Hwan, for 34 years in his past life, he had managed construction projects. 15 years on job sites, from a general laborer to a co-owner of the company. He knew how every joint in a frame house was constructed. He knew load calculations and rafter spacing. He knew how to pour a foundation into clay and how to set formwork on a slope. And now, one after another, simple and clear thoughts fell into place in his mind. Skeletons don't get tired. They don't sleep. They don't demand lunch or smoke breaks. They don't drink on Fridays. They don't quit in the middle of a project. They don't complain about their backs. They don't steal nails. They don't demand a raise. You can give them monotonous work and they'll do it until they fall apart. This isn't a curse. It's every foreman's dream. Do Hwan stood up. His legs were shaking. His body was weak and hungry. He placed his hand on his mother's shoulder. She lifted her tear-stained face toward him. He told her everything would be all right. He told her he knew what to do. She didn't believe him, but she stopped sobbing. That was already something. The elder looked at him with disdainful pity. Do Hwan didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't explain. 3 days. They gave him 3 days. He spent the first day walking around the village. The stranger's memory helped. The boy whose body he was now in knew every path, every yard, every face. People looked away. The neighbor who had treated him to rice cakes yesterday slammed her door shut. The boys he'd played ball with by the river ran across to the other bank. A shopkeeper spat at his feet. Do Hwan wasn't angry. He'd been working with people for 15 years. He knew that fear was stronger than affection. In his past life, he himself would have given a wide berth to a man wearing a name tag. On the second day, he went into the forest beyond the village. He carried a shovel with him. It was old and rusty. His mother had given him a small bundle of rice and a hard-boiled egg. He walked along the trail, counting his steps. A foreman always counts his steps. It gets into your blood. 2 hours later, he found what he was looking for, an old battlefield. Someone else's memory knew of it. About 30 years ago, 2 groups clashed here over a dispute about pasture boundaries. A minor skirmish, a dozen killed. No one had claimed the bodies. The bones had long since grown into the earth. Do Hwan set down his shovel. He crouched down. He looked at the ground beneath his feet. Somewhere here lay the remains of people no one remembered. He closed his eyes. A dark pulsation inside him responded. Mana flowed through his veins. He didn't know how to do this properly. The boy's foreign memory wasn't helping. The boy had received the seal 2 days ago and hadn't tried using it even once. Do Hwan proceeded by feel. He reached out toward the ground. He directed a cold current downward. The earth trembled, barely noticeable, like a distant footstep. Then fingers emerged from beneath the roots, yellow, crooked, without skin or flesh. An arm, an elbow, a shoulder. The skull emerged last. The skeleton stood before him, skinny, one arm longer than the other, cracked ribs. The lower jaw was missing. Do Hwan looked up at it. The skeleton stood motionless and waited. Its empty eye sockets were fixed directly on Do Hwan. The connection between them was subtle yet distinct, like a wire. Do Hwan mentally commanded it to raise its right arm. The skeleton raised it, slowly, with a crunch, but it raised it. Do Hwan told it to lower it. The skeleton lowered it. Do Hwan stood up. He looked around. He found a long stick at the edge of the forest. Straight. He whittled it with a knife. He handed it to the skeleton. He told it to hold it horizontally. The skeleton took the stick and held it out in front of itself. Do Hwan narrowed his eyes. He looked along the stick as if it were a construction level. It was crooked, about 4 degrees. But this was the first skeleton in the history of this world to hold a tool rather than a sword. Do Hwan exhaled. All right, we can work. By the morning of the 3rd day, he'd roused 4 more, all crooked, all rickety. One was missing a leg, but they all stood there, waiting for orders. Do Hwan lined them up and surveyed them like a foreman inspecting a new crew on their first day of work. It was a pitiful sight. In his past life, he would have sent people like this back to the office. But here, the office was a forest clearing, and the labor pool lay beneath the ground. At dawn on the 3rd day, Do Hwan returned to the village. He picked up the bundle of belongings. He hugged his mother. She was crying again. He said he'd be back. He said he'd build her a house. A real one, with big windows and a warm stove. She nodded, not believing a single word. Do Hwan turned and set off down the road toward the south. 5 skeletons followed him, skinny, ridiculous. Their bones rattled with every step. The boys on the fence watched, their mouths agape. The elder spat and went inside. The shopkeeper crossed himself with the sign of the light. Do Hwan didn't look back. He walked, counting his steps. And he thought about how he needed a client. Any client. For any project. Even a shed. Even a chicken coop. The main thing was to get started. The village of Michonne lay a half-day's walk to the south. His borrowed memory knew little about it. A small village, 20 houses. 6 months ago there had been a fire. 8 houses and the old mill had burned down. People were living in huts and dugouts. They were waiting for help from the Baron. The Baron was in no hurry. Do Hwan arrived in Michonne at sunset. The village looked just as he had expected. Charred remains of houses, makeshift shelters made of branches and rags, children in dirty clothes, dogs as skinny as his skeletons. The village head came out to meet him. A sturdy man in his 50s with a scorched left hand. He saw the skeletons and turned pale. Then he flushed. He told that Do Hwan should get out of there. He said the village had enough troubles even without those skeletal creatures. His voice was angry and weary. Do Hwan didn't argue. He asked permission to spend the night in the field beyond the village. He said he'd be gone by morning. The village head waved his hand. The field? Fine, as long as it's far from the houses. Do Hwan walked to the edge of the village. He arranged the skeletons around himself. He ate the last of the rice from his bundle. He lay on his back and looked up at the stars. They were unfamiliar constellations, a foreign sky, a foreign world. He closed his eyes, then he opened them. He stood up. He had no intention of sleeping. He had 5 skeletons and a whole night ahead of him. Do Hwan approached the ruins of the mill. He walked around it. He crouched down. He touched the ground. The slope was uneven, sandstone under a layer of clay. The old mill was built crooked. The wheel was turned so that the spring waters were eroding the foundation. It would have collapsed in a couple of years anyway. Do Hwan pulled a charred plank from his bosom. He took a piece of coal out of his pocket. He began to draw. The lines flowed with confidence. His hands were those of a child, but his movements were those of an adult. A mill, a simple design, a stone foundation, a wooden log frame, a water wheel. He rotated it 15 degrees from its original position. He factored in the slope. He factored in the wind direction and the snow load from the northern ridge. He raised the roof 2 courses higher than standard. An hour later, the blueprint was ready. Do Hwan looked at his skeletons, 5 of them, not many, but enough for the mill. He assigned them to their positions. He gave the first one a shovel. He explained to the second and third that they were to haul stones from the riverbank. He explained it mentally. The connection worked like a walkie-talkie. He sent the instructions and the skeleton carried them out. Not immediately, clumsily, but they carried them out. The 4th and 5th went to clear the rubble. Do Hwan worked alongside them, with his hands, with weak, childlike hands that were covered in blisters and bleeding by midnight. He carried stones. He mixed clay. He hewn logs with a knife. The skeletons worked silently and steadily, without breaks, without tiring. He directed them like a conductor. 2 steps to the left. Stone here. Put the log on its edge. Hold it until it settles. Do Hwan set up a conveyor line. Primitive, rough, but a conveyor line nonetheless. 1 digs, 2 haul. 2 lay it down. He himself supervises and coordinates. By dawn, the foundation was ready. Do Hwan infused the skeletons with mana. It was like exhaling all the air from his lungs and inhaling emptiness. His head spun. He sat down on a stump, but the skeletons continued working. By the second dawn, when village head Machan stepped out of his shed, he stopped dead in his tracks. A new mill stood where the old one had burned down, neat and tidy, with a flat roof, with a working wheel that was already drawing water from the stream. The foundations for 3 houses had been laid nearby. 5 gaunt skeletons were silently hauling stones from the river, and a bony young lad sat on a stump with a mug of water, drawing with charcoal on a board. Do Hwan looked up. He looked at the village headman. He said that the ground was sloped and that he had rotated the mill 15 degrees to prevent it from being washed away in the spring. He said he'd made the roof higher because snow falls heavily from the northern ridge, and the old one would have sagged after 2 winters. The village head sat down silently on the ground beside him. He stared at the mill for a long time, at the boy holding the coal. Then he stood up and left. An hour later, he returned. He brought a bowl of boiled rice. He set it down in front of the skeleton that had been hauling stones. Out of habit. The skeleton didn't eat, but the village head set it down anyway. The village head of Machan was named Park Tae-soo, a sturdy man with a scarred left hand and a heavy gaze. He didn't thank Do Hwan. He didn't praise him. He simply brought 2 bowls of rice every morning, 1 for the boy, 1 for the skeleton by the mill. Do Hwan didn't correct him. Let him do it. During the first week, he finished the mill and got 3 houses up to the walls. The work was slow. 5 skeletons aren't a work crew. It was a shadow of a crew. In his past life, with a crew like that, he would have taken on nothing more than a fence. But here, he had no choice. He got up before dawn. He fed the skeletons with mana. Every time, it wrung him out like a rag. His head buzzed. His hands shook. Then he ate rice for breakfast and went to work. With his hands, with his feet, with his whole body. His 15-year-old body couldn't keep up with the mind of a 34-year-old foreman. His calluses would burst open and bleed again. By evening, his back ached so badly he couldn't straighten up, but the walls were rising. Straight as a string. The locals didn't build like this. Before coming to Hwan, he'd seen their houses. Slanted walls, crooked corners, finger-width gaps between the logs, roofs that leaked after the first downpour, foundations that settled after 2 years. Here they built by eye and on a hunch. He built by calculation. Every stone in its place, every log fitted into its groove, every corner checked with a stick, a plumb line he'd made from a straight branch and a stone on a string. By the end of the second week, 3 houses stood under a roof, small, simple, but straight and sturdy, with walls that kept the wind out, with roofs that kept the rain out, with doors that closed tightly. Widow Cho was the first to move in with her 3 children. She had been living in a hut made of branches for 4 months. The children were sick. The youngest coughed incessantly. Do Hwan built her house last out of the 3, but gave her the key first. Because the youngest had a fever and couldn't spend the night under the branches. Widow Cho entered the house and stopped at the threshold. Then she sank to her knees and began to cry. Do Hwan didn't understand why. The house was simple. 4 walls and a roof, a stove in corner, a window covered with oiled cloth. Then, through her tears, the widow said there was a separate corner in the house, a small nook behind a partition. She asked why it was there. Do Hwan shrugged and said it was for her, so she could sit there when she felt unwell, so the children wouldn't hear and get scared. He'd seen her crying at night in the shack, covering her mouth with her hand so as not to wake the youngest. Do Hwan simply made a place for her where she could cry in peace. Widow Che couldn't speak anymore. She sat in her little nook and silently stroked the wall. And Do Hwan went out and headed for the next foundation. The news spread through the village within an hour. A skeleton boy was building houses. For free. Straight. Warm. With stoves that didn't smoke. People came to look. First from a distance, then closer. The skeletons frightened them, especially the children. But the houses didn't. The houses were beautiful, not with the grandeur of a palace, but with a quiet, human sense of order. Every stone was in its place. Every board was fitted just right, not a single crack. An old woman approached Do Hwan and asked if he could fix her fence. He said he could. He sent one of the skeletons. The skeleton repaired the fence in 2 hours. The old woman brought a boiled turnip. She set it down in front of the skeleton, out of habit too. By the end of of the first month, the village of Machan had been rebuilt. All 8 of the burned-down houses, the mill, the communal granary, the well with a new wooden frame. Do Hwan raised 7 more skeletons from the same battlefield, 12 in total. 12 skinny, crooked skeletons that worked day and night without a break. His mana drained away as he sustained them, like water into sand. Every morning, Do Hwan woke up with a headache and a hollow feeling in his chest. But he held on. He knew that feeling. In his past life, it was called a deadline. Word of the boy from Machan spread through the district, slowly, like smoke across the lowlands. First came a merchant who hauled salt from the southern salt pans. He stopped by the mill, looked around, touched the wall, shook his head, drove on. A week later, another merchant, on purpose. He walked around all the houses, peered under the roofs, tapped on the walls, asked the village head who had built them. The village head nodded toward Do Hwan, who at that very moment was explaining to skeleton number 4 how to properly lay a stone on lime mortar. The merchant stood there for a moment. He thought for a moment. Then he left. Another week later, a messenger from Baron Nam Gondu arrived in Machan. The Baron owned 3 villages and 1 dilapidated estate west of Machan. The messenger delivered the message. The Baron needed a granary, a large one, big enough for 300 sacks of grain. The Old Builders Guild had quoted 5 10 gold pieces and 4 months of labor. The Baron had heard that in Machan some skeletal boy built quickly and cheaply. The Baron was willing to pay 20 gold pieces if the granary was ready by harvest time. Do Hwan read the message. He did the math in his head. A granary for 300 sacks, a stone foundation, wooden walls, a gabled roof. By his estimates, it would take 12 skeletons 10 days to complete the job. The materials would be available on site: stone from the riverbank, timber from the nearby pine forest, and clay right underfoot. 20 gold pieces was good money. Someone else's memory reminded him that this amount could feed his mother for half a year. Do Hwan wrote his reply. The granary would be ready in 2 weeks. The price, 15 gold pieces. The messenger looked at him strangely. The boy was asking for less than what had been offered. Do Hwan knew what he was doing. The first customer should get more than he expected. That's the foundation. It's the first rule in any business. Make it cheaper and better, and the customer will tell everyone else. The Baron sent his approval the next day. Do Hwan gathered his skeleton crew and headed west. Baron Nam Gondu's estate turned out to be a sorry sight. A stone house with a collapsed roof, a yard overgrown with weeds, a stable missing 1 wall, 3 servants, all old. The Baron came out to meet him, a small, gaunt man in his 60s with a sparse beard and watchful eyes. He looked at the skeletons. He turned pale, but he said nothing. He looked at Do Hwan, a boy, skinny, dirty, wearing a tattered jacket. The Baron asked if it was true that he had built the mill in Machan in a single night. Do Hwan said it took 2, 1 night and 1 day. The Baron snorted. He pointed to a spot for the granary, a vacant lot behind the stables. Do Hwan walked around the lot. He crouched down. He felt the ground. Loam, dense, good. The water table is deep. The spot is suitable. He began sketching directly on the ground with a stick. The Baron stood nearby and watched. Then he bent down. Then he crouched. Then he sat down right on the ground. He was a former soldier. He'd seen field fortifications. He'd seen how the engineering corps built things, but he'd never seen drawings like these. Straight lines, precise angles, strange symbols, X's and circles, arrows indicating the order of work. Do Hwan explained without looking up. Here's the foundation, a strip foundation. Half a meter deep will be enough with this type of soil. Here are the walls, frame walls. Not solid masonry, but load-bearing posts with infill. That saves half the stone. Here's the roof, a rafter system. He sketched the joint where the rafters connect to the wall plate. The Baron didn't understand a word, but he grasped the main point. The boy knows what he's doing. Do Hwan got to work that very evening. 12 skeletons took their positions. 3 were digging, 4 were hauling stone, 3 were laying the foundation, 2 were preparing the scaffolding. Division of labor, an assembly line. Each skeleton performed a single task, over and over, without stopping, without mistakes. Do Hwan walked among them like a conductor. He corrected them. He gave orders. He mentally conveyed images of the correct movements. By morning on the 10th day, the barn was ready. The Baron came out and stood there silently for a long time. The barn was beautiful, not in a palatial sense, in the proper sense. The walls were as straight as a ruler. The roof was gabled with the correct pitch. The gate was wide, hinged on wrought iron hinges that Do Hwan had forged himself on a portable anvil. Inside, it was dry and cool. Ventilation came through air vents in the foundation. Grain in a barn like this wouldn't rot or get damp. The Baron paid 15 gold pieces. Then he paused, and asked how much it would cost to repair the roof at the estate. Do Hwan looked at the Baron's house. He did a quick mental calculation. The roof was a minor issue, but the entire house was in disrepair. The foundation had settled on the east side. The walls were cracked. The chimney was leaning. Do Hwan could have simply repaired the roof and left, but that would have been a half-assed job. He hadn't worked that way in his past life, and he wasn't about to start now. He told the Baron he'd fix the roof, but he'd also reinforce the foundation, and patch the crack in the wall, and straighten the chimney, and rebuild the stove because the old one smoked and would eventually cause a fire. The Baron asked how much. Do Hwan said 20 gold pieces. The Baron shook his head. The old guild would have charged 100 for such work, and it would have taken them half a year. The Baron agreed. By this time, the entire district already knew about the skeleton boy from Machon. Do Hwan spent his second month at the Baron's estate. He repaired the house. He reinforced the foundation. He rebuilt the stove. He patched the cracks. He re-roofed the house. He repaired the stable. He put up a new fence. Every evening, Baron Namgondu would go out into the yard and silently watch the 12 skeletons working by torchlight. He stopped being afraid of them on the third day. By the fifth, he began to tell them apart. Skeleton number 3 was the oldest. Its bones had darkened with age. It moved more slowly than the others, but more carefully. Do Hwan assigned him to the delicate work, fitting door jambs, sanding window frames. The Baron called him Grandpa. Do Hwan didn't object. Names are good. Names turn a tool into a worker. Orders came one after another. A shed for the blacksmith in the village of Tangpo, a bridge over a stream on the road to the market, a new roof for the temple in the village of Wolsan. Small jobs, simple work, but every completed project added a brick to the foundation of his reputation. Do Hwan counted his money. He saved. He set money aside. He lived on rice and vegetables. He sent money to his mother through merchants every 2 weeks. In return, she sent him dried fish and warm socks knitted from goat's wool. The socks were lopsided and 3 sizes too big. Do Hwan wore them every night. By the beginning of the 3rd month, he had brought the total number of skeletons to 30. The battlefield in the forest beyond Pyeongchon had been exhausted. He found another spot, an old cemetery in an abandoned village north of Machon. The village had been flooded 15 years ago. No residents remained. The cemetery was overgrown with waist-high grass. It was here that Do Hwan performed the ritual for the first time. He didn't know the local rituals. He did it his own way, the Korean way. He bowed. He poured water into 3 cups. He placed them in front of the outermost graves. He quietly said that he was taking their bones for his work, that they would build homes for the living, that he would take care of them, that when the work was finished, he would return them to the earth with honors. No one in Hera had ever done it that way. Necromancers simply raised the dead and used them, like firewood, like stones, without words and without respect. Hwan considered this wrong. These bones belonged to people. They had lived. They had names, families, and children. He couldn't remember them, but he could respect them. 30 skeletons. That's already a crew. A real one. Do Hwan reorganized the workflow. He divided them into teams of 5. Each team had its own specialization. First team, earthwork, digging foundations and trenches. Second team, transportation, carrying stone and scaffolding. Third team, masonry and wall construction. Fourth team, roofing. Fifth team, finishing and minor repairs. Sixth unit, reserve, replacing the tired and the broken. The skeletons didn't get tired, but they did break. A stone could shatter a phalanx. A log could crush a rib. Every evening, Do Hwan inspected every skeleton. He checked the joints. He repaired what he could. He replaced bones from the reserve. He carried a bag of spare bones with him, just as a mechanic carries a bag of spare parts. To an outsider, it looked eerie. A young boy sitting by the fire, attaching a new arm to a skeleton with a rope made of sinew. But it was work. The ordinary work of a foreman. Take care of your tools, and they won't let you down. By the middle of the 3rd month, a girl arrived in the village of Machon. She came on foot, alone, with no belongings, with no money, wearing an oversized men's work jacket and carrying a bundle of papers under her arm. Her hair was tied back in a bun. Her face was smudged with road dust. Her slender fingers were calloused from coal. So Rin, 19 years old, She stood by the mill and looked at it the way a musician looks at a fine instrument. For a long time, intently, she walked around it. She touched the walls. She peered under the roof. She crouched down by the foundation and ran her finger along the line of the masonry. Then she stood up and went to look for the person who had built it. Meanwhile, Do Hwan was sitting on the roof of a barn in a neighboring village, scolding skeleton number 9 for a crooked ridgepole. So Rin found him by evening. She stood below. She looked up. She said she'd come from the capital. She said she'd been expelled from the Royal School of Architects. She said she'd heard about a skeletal builder who could erect mills in a single night. Do Hwan climbed down from the roof. He looked at her. She was thin, hungry. Her eyes were burning. He said he'd built the mill in a day and a half, not overnight. So Rin didn't smile. She took out her bundle, unwrapped it. Inside were blueprints. Do Hwan crouched over them and forgot everything else. They were designs for houses, small ones, simple ones, for poor families. No columns or porticos, no marble staircases or carved pediments, just houses. But what houses? The floor plans were thought out down to the smallest detail. The kitchen next to the well, the children's bedroom away from the entrance. Windows facing south for light and warmth. Each house was designed for a specific family. Here's a house for a fisherman, a wide entrance for the nets, a shed for drying them. Here's a house for a blacksmith, thick walls to keep out the heat from the nearby forge. Here is a house for a large family, a shared dining room and separate nooks for each child. Do Hwan stared at the blueprints for a long time. Then he looked up. He asked why she had been expelled. So Rin replied in an even voice. She had presented these designs at the graduation exhibition. The professor said that architecture exists for decoration, not for the common people. He said that houses for the poor aren't architecture, but pigsties. So Rin replied that the pigsties in the capital are better than the houses where half the subjects live. She was expelled that very day. Do Hwan looked at the blueprints once more. He looked at So Rin. He said her designs were sound and beautiful, that he wanted to build them. All. So Rin stood motionless. Then she blinked. Then she blinked again. Do Hwan was afraid she would fall. She didn't fall. She just said very quietly that no one had ever told her that before. Do Hwan nodded. He sat her down by the fire. He gave her rice and boiled turnips. So Rin ate eagerly without saying a word. Then he laid out his drawings in front of her, the ones he'd sketched with charcoal on wooden boards. Blueprints for a mill, a granary, residential houses. So Rin looked at them and couldn't tear her eyes away. She saw things that no one in Hera had ever seen. Truss joints, load calculations for support posts, ventilation diagrams using air vents. She didn't know these solutions, but she understood them, at first glance, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to see them. Do Hwan spoke, and she listened. He explained what modular construction was. One design, many houses, calculated once, built 1,000 times. Every component is identical. Every dimension is standard. The crew doesn't have to think on site. The crew performs well-rehearsed operations. So Rin asked how that was possible if every site was different. Do Hwan replied that the sites were, yes, but the components weren't. A rafter is the same on any hill. The roof pitch is calculated based on snow load, not the client's preference. They talked until dawn. The construction workers were working nearby in the moonlight. So Rin paid no attention to them. To her, they were just part of the construction site, no more intimidating than a winch or a wheelbarrow. By morning, Do Hwan asked her to stay, to be his architect, so Rin nodded silently. From that day on, everything changed. Do Hwan built, so Rin designed. He gave her knowledge that didn't exist in this world. She turned it into blueprints that any mason could read. They complemented each other like the teeth of a gear. He knew how, she knew for whom. Their first joint project was a house for a blind old woman from Machon, Grandma Kim. She lived alone. She walked along the walls as if they were handrails. Do Hwan told So Rin that handrails were needed along the entire length of every room, at the same height, smooth, without splinters. So Rin looked at him and added her own idea. A different texture at every turn, so that Grandma Kim would know where she was by touch. Rough wood at the entrance, smooth wood by the stove, carved wood by the bed. Do Hwan stared at her. Then he quietly said she was a genius. For the first time, So Rin blushed. The 4th month began with rain, torrential, cold. The roads were washed out. Work on open sites came to a halt. The scaffolding wasn't afraid of the water, but the clay beneath their feet was, and the stones in the masonry wouldn't set in the wet mortar. Do Hwan knew this from his past life. The rainy season is a dead season for construction. He used the downtime to prepare. So Rin sat under the awning and sketched. 10 designs in 2 weeks. Standard series, single-family homes, a 2-family home, a craftsman's house with a workshop on the ground floor, a small barn, a large barn, a pedestrian bridge, a cargo bridge. Each project was broken down into components. Each component was drawn separately. Every dimension was recorded. Do Hwan checked the calculations. He made corrections. He argued. They argued every evening. So Rin wanted beauty, carved window frames, curved cornices. Do Hwan cut away the excess. Every curl meant an extra day's work. Every day's work meant an extra gold coin. An extra gold coin meant a family that wouldn't get a house because there wasn't enough money. So Rin would fall silent. She'd think. Then she'd find a simpler and more beautiful solution. She learned quickly, faster than anyone Do Hwan had known in either of his lives. By the end of the rainy season, they had a complete library of designs, a folder of blueprints tied with a rope. Do Hwan looked at it and thought that in his past life, any design firm would have paid a year's salary for a folder like that. Here, it was worth a stack of paper and a piece of coal. The rains ended in the middle of the 5th month. Do Hwan led the skeletons out to the job sites. 6 orders had piled up. 2 houses, a blacksmith shop, a bridge, a sheepfold, and a granary for a merchant from a neighboring county. 30 skeletons were enough to handle 2 sites at the same time. Do Hwan divided the crew, 15 for the nearby site, 15 for the distant one. So Rin led one group, he led the other. Communication with the skeletons worked at a distance of 200 to 300 paces. Beyond that, it weakened. Do Hwan had to be present at the site. That was the bottleneck. He was alone. There were 2 sites. He had to run back and forth between them. In the morning at one, in the evening at the other. At night at a third if the deadline was tight. So Rin could see how exhausted he was getting. She saw him falling asleep on the go. She saw the blood on his palms from the ropes and tools. She didn't say anything. She just set a bowl of hot broth in front of him every morning. And every evening she checked the blueprints he'd drawn with his tired hands. Once, she found a mistake in the roof calculations. Rafters spaced that far apart wouldn't withstand the snow load. Do Hwan looked at the drawing. He blinked. He never made mistakes like that. Not even in his past life after a 24-hour shift. So his body was more exhausted than he'd thought. He corrected it in silence. So Rin nodded silently. From that day on, she checked every one of his calculations. He noticed it. He didn't say a word. He simply began to trust her more. By the 6th month, 2 things happened. The first was good, the second was not. The good thing arrived on a trade caravan of 5 wagons loaded with sawn lumber. The caravan stopped at Do Hwan's workshop. A young woman in a traveling dress, with an abak at her waist, jumped down from the front wagon. Yoon Mei, 22 years old, the daughter of the bankrupt merchant Yoon family. She had pulled her family out of the depths of poverty, all by herself, without any help. She started out selling fish at the market when she was 14. By the time she was 20, she owned 3 wagons and a contract to supply lumber. Yoon Mei came as a supplier. Do Hwan needed lumber, a lot of it, on a regular basis. Local loggers couldn't keep up with his demand. Yoon Mei offered to supply it, 100 logs a month, planed and sized to specification, delivered to the site. The price was fair. Do Hwan agreed. They shook hands. Yoon Mei was going to leave, but she stayed for a day, then 2, then a week. She walked around the construction sites. She counted. She took notes. She watched how the scaffolding crews worked, how Do Hwan organized the flow of materials, how So Rin distributed the blueprints. On the 7th evening, Yoon Mei came to Do Hwan and placed a sheet of paper covered in numbers in front of him. She had calculated everything: the cost of materials for each project, mana costs converted to working hours, delivery logistics, lead time from order to completion, the profit margin for each project. Do Hwan looked at her calculations. He knew how to do the math. 15 years in the construction business, but Yoon Mei was better at it. She saw money the way he saw load-bearing structures, right through to the core. She showed him that he was losing 20% of his profit on logistics, that it was cheaper to transport stone not from the river, but from a quarry 10 li to the east, that buying nails in bulk from the blacksmith in Tangpo would save 3 gold pieces a month, that if they standardized the sizes of the lumber, waste would be cut in half. Do Hwan listened and nodded. Then he asked what she wanted. Yoon Mei smiled, broadly, predatorily. She said she wanted to be his business partner, a stake in the business. She would take charge of procurement, logistics, negotiations with clients, finances. He builds, she sells. Do Hwan thought about it for exactly 1 minute. He agreed. Yoon Mei held out her hand. He shook it. So Rin stood to the side and looked at Yoon Mei with an expression that Do Hwan couldn't quite read. The second incident happened 3 days after Yoon Mei's arrival. A bad one.
3 men came to the workshop. 2 were wearing leather jackets with knives on their belts. The third was wearing a long cloak of the Haran Builders Guild. The one in the cloak was an inspector, a short man with oily eyes and a thin smile. He introduced himself. He said he had come on behalf of the guild's southern branch. He said the guild was concerned. An unregistered contractor had appeared in 3 districts. He was working without a license, without the guild's approval, without quality control. He was undercutting prices.
He's using undead on construction sites. This is a violation of the guild's charter. It is a violation of the Construction Act. It is a violation of the undead decree. Do Hwan listened, silently. So Rin stood nearby, clutching a pencil so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Yunmei sat on a crate, spinning a coin on her finger. She wasn't smiling. The inspector finished listing the violations. There were 2. Do Hwan could have answered each one. He knew the local laws. Someone else's memory, plus 2 months of studying the scrolls in Baron Namgondu's library. A guild license was required for work in cities. Machan and the surrounding area were villages. The construction law did not apply to projects costing less than 10 gold pieces. The undead decree prohibited the use of the dead for military purposes. The construction was not a military project. But he didn't argue. The inspector hadn't come for the law. He'd come for the money. Do Hwan looked at him and asked directly, "How much?" The inspector stopped smiling. Then he smiled again, a different smile, a businesslike one. He said the guild was willing to turn a blind eye, under certain conditions. 20% of every order, plus a monthly contribution to the guild's fund, plus the right of first refusal on major projects. In other words, if an order worth more than 50 gold pieces comes in, the guild decides whether to give it to Do Hwan or keep it for itself. Yunmei jumped up from the crate. A coin clattered onto the floor. She began to speak quickly and angrily. "This is robbery. This is extortion." "Exactly." Do Hwan raised his hand. Yunmei fell silent. He looked at the inspector. He said he'd think about it. The inspector nodded. He said he had a week. He turned and left. 2 men in leather jackets followed him out. One lingered in the doorway. He looked at the skeletons in the courtyard. Yunmei turned to Do Hwan and said he couldn't agree to that. 20% is half the profit. They'll go broke in 3 months. Do Hwan said he knew. So Rin asked what he was going to do. Do Hwan looked out the window. In the courtyard, 12 skeletons were finishing the masonry for the wall of the new warehouse. Neat rows of stones rose up in the sunset light. He said they would build faster, more, better, so that when the guild came a second time, they would have no leverage. He said they needed clients who would stand by their side. Barons, village elders, merchants. People for whom they had built houses, barns, and bridges. People who knew the value of their work. Yunmei looked at him. Then she nodded slowly. So Rin nodded as well. That night, Do Hwan didn't sleep. He sat by the fire and sketched. Not a building, a diagram, an organizational chart. Suppliers, clients, sites, routes, warehouses, people. He wasn't building a house, he was building a structure, a company. A system that would keep running even when the guild struck its next blow. Because there would be a next blow. Do Hwan knew that. In his past life, he'd lost bids to competitors who played dirty. False complaints, inspections in the middle of a project, disrupted deliveries, poaching workers. He'd been through it 5 times. There wasn't a 6th time because he'd learned his lesson. The bonfire burned out by dawn. Do Hwan wrapped up the operation. He fed the skeletons with manna. His head began to buzz. The emptiness in his chest grew deeper. He stood up and went to work. The week after the inspector's visit passed quietly. Too quiet. Do Hwan waited for the second blow. It didn't come. Instead, something else arrived. An order. A big one. The first truly large one. The Pure Sky Monastery on the banks of the Hagen River requested the restoration of its collapsed wing. An earthquake a year earlier had brought down the south wall and part of the roof. The monks lived in the surviving section and waited. The Builders Guild requested 200 gold pieces and a year of labor. The monastery had neither. The abbot sent a letter to Baron Namgondu. The baron wrote to Do Hwan. Do Hwan took So Rin and went to inspect the site. The monastery stood on a hill above the river, a beautiful spot, a breeze from the water, a pine forest all around. The building itself was old, about 200 years old. The stone walls were 3 cubits thick, the roof was tiled. The south wing lay in a heap of stones and broken beams. So Rin walked around the ruins. She sat down. She touched the stones. She looked at the load-bearing walls. Do Hwan stood nearby and assessed the scope of the work. Materials, time. The stone could be taken directly from the rubble. 90% of the blocks were intact. They just needed to be sorted and cleaned. Lumber for the beams. lumber for the rafters, roof tiles. The roof tiles would have to be ordered. Young Mei would find a supplier. 30 skeletons, 3 weeks, maybe 4. The price. He told the abbot 70 gold pieces. The abbot was an old monk with kind eyes and trembling hands. He looked at Do Hwan. At the skeletons standing below at the foot of the hill, Do Hwan could see the abbot struggling with himself. Undead, an abomination, a holy monastery. But the south wing lay in ruins. The monks froze in the winter. The library was getting soaked by the rain. The abbot agreed. So-rin began sketching right there on the spot. She sat down on a rock and unfolded a sheet of paper. Do Hwan stood beside her. They worked together. She drew the plan. He calculated the loads. She suggested an arch over the library entrance. He said an arch wasn't necessary. It would weaken the wall. She argued. He argued back. The abbot sat nearby, listening to their back and forth with a slight smile. Then So-rin found a solution. Not an arch. A lintel designed to mimic an arch. A decorative element atop the load-bearing beam. Beauty without compromising strength. Do Hwan looked at the drawing. He nodded. All right. Work began the next day. Do Hwan transferred all 30 laborers to the monastery. Smaller jobs were put on hold. Yun Mei notified the clients. She apologized. She promised compensation for the delay. The project was important. The first major one. The first high-profile one. If the monastery turned out well, word of it would spread beyond the villages. The skeletons worked around the clock, day and night. The monks got used to them surprisingly quickly, perhaps because monks are closer to death than ordinary people. Or maybe because they saw how Do Hwan bowed to his skeleton every morning before replenishing his mana. One young monk asked why he bowed to the dead. Do Hwan replied that they weren't dead, they were workers, and every worker deserves respect. The monk thought about it and left. The next morning he came back with 2 cups of tea. He placed one in front of Do Hwan, the second in front of skeleton number 3, Grandpa. So-rin worked side by side with Do Hwan, every day, from dawn till dusk. Then they would sit by the fire and draw up plans for the next day. He would speak, and she would sketch. She would suggest, and he would calculate. Their conversations sounded strange to any outsider's ear. The rafter spacing is 1 meter 20. No, 1 meter 10. You're in snow zone 3. How do you know? By the way the pines lean on the north-facing slope. All right, 10 meters. The wall plate should be larch or oak. Larch. It lasts longer, but oak is stronger against bending. There's no bending here, it's a support. Larch. One evening, they stayed up later than usual. So-rin was sketching out a plan for the drainage system around the monastery. A complicated task. The hillside, the groundwater. Do Hwan explained the principle of cut-off waterproofing. He traced lines in the dirt with his finger. A clay barrier around the foundation. Drainage channels sloping toward the river. So-rin listened, her head tilted. Her eyes glistened in the light of the campfire. Not from tears, from curiosity. She asked question after question. Do Hwan answered. He demonstrated. He sketched. At some point, he fell silent. So-rin did too. They sat side by side, shoulder to shoulder. It was quiet. Only the river murmured below, and the skeletons clattered stone against stone on the clearing. So-rin rested her head on his shoulder. She fell asleep. She just fell asleep. Instantly. The way people fall asleep when they've been holding on to their stubbornness and finally let go. Do Hwan didn't move. He sat there, staring at the campfire, listening to her breathe, quietly and evenly. He could have woken her up, sent her to sleep in the tent, but he didn't. He sat there until morning. When So-rin woke up, she saw Do Hwan sitting in the same position, his eyes red and his neck stiff. She jumped up, blushed, and started babbling incoherently. Do Hwan said everything was fine and that he needed some tea. So-rin ran off to get tea. Do Hwan rubbed his neck and smiled. The monastery was ready in 26 days, 3 days longer than he had expected. The delay was due to the roof tiles. Yun Mei found a supplier 2 days' journey away, but he had delayed the shipment. Yun Mei went to see him in person. She returned a day later with a full wagon load of roof tiles and icy fury in her eyes. She said the supplier would never delay another shipment. She didn't explain how she'd managed it. Do Hwan didn't ask. The south wing of the monastery stood as good as new. No, better than new. The walls were the same. The stones were the same. But the masonry was neater. The joints were thinner. The roof was higher and sturdier. The lintel above the library entrance looked like an arch, but bore the load like a beam. So-rin had come up with the idea. Do Hwan had built it. A clay embankment surrounded the foundation, and drainage channels led the water to the river. No more flooding. The library scrolls were safe. The abbot walked through the restored wing, running his hand along the walls. Then he stopped. He turned to Do Hwan. He asked why the window in the cell of the elderly monk Hyun-soo was wider than in the others. Do Hwan explained that monk Hyun-soo had poor eyesight. He needed more light to read the sutras. The abbot was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly that the Builders Guild would have sent standard windows to all the cells, and wouldn't have asked a single monk how he lived. Do Hwan shrugged. He said it wasn't a heroic deed, just common sense. He builds homes for people, not boxes for bodies. The abbot bowed to him, deeply, as an equal. Do Hwan was taken aback. He bowed in return. The monastery paid 70 gold pieces, and the abbot wrote a letter, a long one, a detailed one, with the monastery's seal. He sent it to 12 temples and 8 noble households throughout the southern province. The letter stated that the bone builder from Machon had restored the collapsed wing in 26 days, that the work was flawless, that the skeletons had not desecrated the holy place, that the boy bowed to his dead workers every morning and called each one by name. That letter changed everything. Over the next 2 weeks, 11 orders arrived, 3 from barons, 2 from merchants, 4 from village elders, 1 from the manager of the count's estate, and 1 from the commander of a border outpost who needed new barracks. Do Hwan stared at the stack of letters. 11 orders. He had 30 skeletons, 1 So-rin, 1 Yun-mei, and himself. A single source of mana for the entire operation. He couldn't take all 11. He couldn't choose. Every order meant money. Every refusal meant a lost client. Yun-mei sorted the letters into stacks. She sorted them by profitability, by urgency, by strategic value. She said they needed to take 4, 2 major ones, 2 minor ones. The rest would have to wait. Do Hwan agreed, but he realized he needed more skeletons, more people, more hands, living hands. Skeletons did the rough work perfectly, but the fine work, carving, forging, high-end woodworking, wasn't in their nature. He needed craftsmen, living ones, real ones, who would be willing to work with a necromancer, in a world where a necromancer is worse than a leper. Do Hwan looked at Yun-mei. He looked at So-rin. He said he needed someone who knew how to organize people, not skeletons, people. Someone who knows how to hire, how to train, how to retain, how to punish without cruelty and praise without flattery. Yun-mei thought for a moment.
Then she said she knew such a person, a widow, the former manager of a large noble estate. She was driven out after her husband's death. She lives in the city. She gets by doing day labor. Yun-mei said that this woman could manage 100 workers with a single glance. Her name was Kang Ara. Do Hwan told Yun-mei to find her. Yun-mei left the next morning. Do Hwan stayed behind. So-rin stayed behind. 30 skeletons were working, 2 projects at once, a house for a merchant and a bridge across the Hagan River by the road to the market. Do Hwan ran back and forth between the sites. So-rin was drafting plans for both. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and said nothing, tired, happy, quiet. So-rin no longer fell asleep on his shoulder, but she would sit next to him, close, and sometimes their hands touched when they both reached for the same drawing. Neither of them pulled their hand away first. Yun-mei returned 4 days later. She wasn't alone. A tall woman with a straight back and a calm gaze stepped down from the wagon. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her clothes were simple but clean, not a single wrinkle in the fabric. Kang Ara, 26 years old, a widow, former manager of the Hong family estate. For 8 years, she had run the household of an estate where 120 people lived. She knew everyone by name. She remembered when each person's child was born. She kept track of supplies and expenses, salaries and repairs, sowing and harvesting. Her husband was a knight. He went to war. He never returned. Her husband's family gave her 3 days to pack her things. They said that a widow without an heir was of no use to the clan. 8 years of impeccable service. 3 days to leave. Kang Ara left. Without tears, without complaints, with just one small bundle. For 2 years, she scraped by doing day labor in the city. She did laundry, she sewed, she counted other people's books for copper coins. Yun-mei found her in a cheap room above a dye shop. The walls were damp with steam. Her clothes smelled of dye. Kang Ara listened to the offer. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. Then she asked one thing. Is he really a necromancer? Yun-mei said yes.
Kang Ara was silent for a moment, then she said she didn't care. She'd seen enough living monsters not to be afraid of dead workers. Until Hwan met her at the workshop. He held out his hand. Kang Ara looked at his hand, at the calluses, at the ingrained dust, at the abrasions from the ropes. Then she shook it, firmly.
Like someone who was used to working rather than standing on ceremony. Hwan showed her the work areas, the warehouses, blueprints, the ledgers Yunmei had been keeping, order lists, work schedules. Kang Ara walked alongside him, silently absorbing the information. After 2 hours of touring the site, she stopped in the middle of the courtyard. She turned to Do Hwan. She told him his place was a mess. So-Rin looked up from her blueprint. Yunmei stopped clicking the abacus beads. Do Hwan blinked. Kang Ara began to list the problems. Materials are lying around unaccounted for. Nails are mixed in with dowels. The lumber is stacked without spacers and will warp in a week. Tools aren't secured to the work areas. Spare bones for skeletons are stored in a sack without being sorted. Work schedules are written in charcoal on boards that will get wet at the first rain. There is no materials acceptance log. There is no project handover log. There is no client registry. There is no mana consumption log. Do Hwan listened. Every word was true. He was a good builder, but he was a poor organizer. He was a foreman, not a director. He could manage a construction site, but not a company. In his past life, he had a partner who handled the paperwork. Here, he had no partner. There was Yunmei, but she counted money rather than keeping things in order. There was So-Rin, but she designed houses rather than keep the books. Kang Ara was exactly what he was missing: order, a system, and discipline. Do Hwan told her she was right. He said that was exactly why he needed her. Kang Ara nodded. She took off her outer jacket and rolled up her sleeves. She asked for paper and ink. By the evening of the first day, she had compiled an inventory of all the materials in the warehouse. By the end of the second day, she had transcribed all current orders into a single logbook with dates and amounts. By the end of the third day, she had developed a system for tracking the working hours of the skeletons. Yes, skeletons. She numbered each one. She recorded the condition of the bones. She noted their specializations. Skeleton number 3, Grandpa, fine urbantree. Skeleton number 7, masonry. Left shoulder blade is cracked, needs replacement. Skeleton number 12, earthwork. Right leg shorter than the left, compensate with a shim. Do Hwan looked at her notes and felt something akin to delight. For the first time in half a year in this world, he felt that he wasn't carrying everything on his own shoulders. So-Rin was wary of Kang Ara. The two women were too different. So-Rin lived by inspiration. Kang Ara lived by a schedule. So-Rin scattered blueprints all over the table. Kang Ara filed them into folders by number. So-Rin forgot to eat. Kang Ara made sure everyone ate on time. On the fourth day, the first conflict arose. So-Rin was working on a project for a new house for the merchant Park Sang-ho. She had come up with an unusual roof, a hipped roof with curved eaves, beautiful yet complex. Kang Ara looked at the drawing and asked how long such a roof would take to build. So-Rin said 5 days. Kang Ara opened a journal and showed that, according to the schedule, only 3 days were allocated for the entire roof. The merchant is expecting it by the deadline. A delay means a fine. A fine means a loss of profit. A loss of profit means they won't be able to take the next order because they won't have enough money for materials. So-Rin said that beauty is more important than the schedule. Kang Ara said that the schedule puts food on the table, while beauty just hangs on the wall. So-Rin looked at Kang Ara in a way that made the air between them turn cold. Kang Ara looked at So-Rin with the same calm expression she used to look at everything in the world. Do Hwan sat between them and thought that managing living people was 10 times harder than managing skeletons. He stepped in. He told So-Rin to simplify the roof, a gable roof, but with a decorative element on the ridge, a simple design, but with character. 3 days, no penalty. So-Rin frowned. Then she sighed. Then she picked up a pencil and, an hour later, presented a new design. A gable roof with a carved ridge in the shape of intertwined branches. Simple, quick, and beautiful. Kang Ara looked at the drawing. She nodded. So-Rin nodded back at her. It wasn't peace. It was a truce. But a truce is a start. By the end of the 7th month, 3 living people were working in the workshop in addition to the team. The first to arrive was an old mason from Tongpo. His name was Moon Dok-soo, 63 years old. His hands were ravaged by arthritis. The Builders Guild had denied him a pension because he hadn't completed the required years of service. He drank. He lived in a shed with relatives who barely tolerated him. Kang Ara found him. She brought him here. Do Hwan gave him a job. Not bricklaying, his hands wouldn't allow it. Training the scaffolding crew. Moon Doksu knew 300 types of masonry: decorative, load-bearing, arched. He demonstrated each one to the skeleton, slowly, patiently. The skeleton repeated the motions, over and over, until it was perfect. The old man stopped drinking on the third day, not because he'd decided to quit, but because he no longer had time for it. The second to arrive was a 16-year-old boy, Han Jae-woo, an orphan from Wolsan. He'd been wandering the streets, stealing. He got caught. According to county law, his right hand was to be cut off. Yunmei ransomed him for 2 silver coins. She brought him to the workshop, dirty and angry. Do Hwan looked at him, skinny, eyes like a hunted dog, quick hands, deft fingers. A thief with hands like that could make a good carpenter. Do Hwan gave him a plane and a board. He told him to plane it. The boy planed it crookedly. Do Hwan showed him how to do it right. The boy planed it better. A week later, Han Jae-woo was planing boards straighter than any apprentice in the county. 2 weeks later, he was making window frames. A month later, Kang Ara entered him in the ledger as a full-time carpenter and set his salary. The boy received the first money he'd ever earned honestly and didn't know what to do with it. So Rin suggested he buy a new shirt. A third woman arrived. She was the widow Park Eun-hee, 40 years old, 5 children. Her husband had died in a mine collapse. They didn't give her any compensation. She knew how to mix clay and fire bricks. She'd learned as a child from her father, a potter. Hwan put her to work making bricks, simple, standard ones, in the sizes he specified. 1 mold, 1,000 bricks. Park Eun-hee mixed clay from morning till night. The children helped. The younger ones shaped the clay. The older ones carried it to the kiln. Do Hwan built them a house next to the workshop, with separate rooms for each child. Park Eun-hee stood in the doorway, unable to step inside. She had never lived in a house where every child had their own room. Do Hwan said that this was her home, that she had earned it, that the bricks she made became walls for other families. Park Eun-hee went inside. She sat down on the floor. She hugged her youngest daughter, and she laughed softly. She didn't cry. She laughed. Do Hwan came out and closed the door. Yunmei was standing on the porch, calculating something on an abacus. She looked up. She looked at him. She asked why he was doing this. Homes for the workers, separate rooms. That's an unnecessary expense. Do Hwan said it wasn't an expense. It was an investment. A person who lives in a nice house works better. Yunmei gave him a long look. Then she asked quietly, "What about you? When will you build a house for yourself?" Do Hwan shrugged. He said he didn't have time. Yunmei snapped the abacus beads, sharply. She said he was an idiot. Do Hwan looked at her in surprise. Yunmei blushed. She turned away. She said that if he collapsed from exhaustion, the whole construction site would crumble along with the skeletons, and that she wasn't going to lose her investment just because he didn't know how to take care of himself. Then she left, quickly. Do Hwan stood on the porch, thinking that Yunmei had just called him an idiot and blushed at the same time, and that he didn't understand how those two things went together. The next morning, a bowl of hot soup was sitting in front of his door, and a little note with crooked characters. "Eat!" No signature. Yunmei's handwriting. Do Hwan ate the soup. He washed the bowl. He put the note in his pocket. The 8th month brought the first real trouble. Not from the Builders Guild, from the Temple of Light. 2 inquisitors arrived in Machan on horseback. White cloaks, silver chains across their chests, swords at their belts, faces as hard as stone. They had been sent in response to a complaint. Do Hwan didn't know who had filed the complaint, but he had his suspicions. The senior inquisitor introduced himself, Father Zhang Guan, a lean, wiry man in his 40s with a shaved head and narrow eyes. His voice was quiet and steady, more terrifying than a scream. He read out the charges: desecration of the dead, use of the undead near sacred sites. The Pure Sky Monastery was mentioned in a separate line, conducting necromantic rituals without the supervision of the temple. Do Hwan stood and listened. So Rin stood to his right, Kang Ara to his left. Yunmei stood slightly behind him. 30 skeletons were on the clearing about 2 li from the village. Do Hwan hadn't summoned them on purpose. It would have been foolish to show the undead to the inquisitors. Father Zhang Guan finished reading. He asked what the accused had to say in his defense. Do Hwan said 3 things. First, he had not desecrated the dead. He had gathered bones from abandoned battlefields and forgotten cemeteries. Before each collection, he performed a memorial rite. He bowed. He offered water. He spoke words of respect. The inquisitor asked what words. Do Hwan repeated them. The inquisitor remained silent. No such rituals were found in any known necromantic treatise. Second, the Pure Sky Monastery had invited him themselves. The abbot signed the contract. The work was accepted. Payment was made. The abbot wrote a letter of recommendation. Do Hwan produced a copy. The monastery's seal. The abbot's signature. Father Zhongguan read it. His expression did not change, but he read it twice. Third, the decree on the undead prohibits the use of the dead for military purposes. Construction is not a military action. No law of Haran prohibits a necromancer from building houses. The Inquisitor fixed him with a long stare. Do Hwan held his ground. He did not look away. Father Zhongguan said he would conduct an investigation, that he would remain in the village for 3 days, that if he found any violations, the case would be referred to the Tribunal of Light. The Tribunal of Light. Do Hwan knew from someone else's memory what that meant. A trial with no right of appeal, a verdict within a day, execution at dawn. For necromancers, the tribunal handed down only one sentence: purification by fire. For 3 days, the Inquisitor walked through the village. He questioned the residents. He inspected the houses. He looked into every corner. He tapped on the walls. He checked the foundations. His assistant took notes. Village head Park Tae-soo answered the questions briefly and sullenly. Yes, the boy built houses. Yes, with skeletons. Yes, the first houses were free. No, no one complained. No, the skeletons didn't harm anyone. No, he didn't dig up the dead from the village. The widow Cho said that the boy had built her a house with a nook where she could cry without scaring the children. The Inquisitor asked why she needed a nook for crying. The widow looked at him in such a way that he didn't ask the next question. Grandmother Kim said that in her house there were railings running the entire length of the rooms, with a different texture at every turn. She said that for the first time in 10 years of blindness, she could walk around the house without bumping into the walls. The Inquisitor ran his fingers along the railings. Rough wood by the entrance, smooth wood by the stove, carved wood by the bed. He remained silent. Baron Namgon-do had sent a letter, brief, in a military style. A skeletal boy had built him a barn and repaired the house. The work was excellent. The price was fair. If the temple touched the contractor, the Baron would file a complaint with the Royal Chancellery. It wasn't a threat. The Baron was a minor figure. His complaint was worthless. But it showed that Do Hwan had defenders, albeit small ones. On the second day, the Inquisitor arrived at the site. Do Hwan couldn't hide the skeletons. They were working. 30 skeletons were erecting the walls of 2 houses at the same time. Father Zhongguan stood and watched, for a long time, in silence. The skeletons laid the stones, evenly, precisely, without haste. One passed the mortar, another placed a block, a third checked the level, an assembly line. Precise, well-coordinated, like a machine. The Inquisitor walked all the way around the site. He looked at the foundation, at the masonry, at the scaffolding, at the tools laid out in the order Kang Ara had established a week ago. Every hammer in its place, every plumb line on its hook. He turned to Do Hwan. He asked why skeleton number 3 was working more slowly than the others. Do Hwan replied that Grandpa was old. His bones had darkened with age. His joints weren't what they used to be, but his hands were the most precise of all. He did the fine work, fitting the pieces together, fine-tuning them. The Inquisitor asked why he had called the skeleton Grandpa. Do Hwan said that every worker deserves a name. The Inquisitor was silent for a moment. Then he asked about the memorial rite, exactly how he performed it. Do Hwan explained. A bow, 3 cups of water, words. I take your bones for work. You will build homes for the living. I will take care of you. When the work is done, I will return you to the earth with honors. The Inquisitor stood motionless. His assistant stopped taking notes. On the evening of the 3rd day, Father Zhongguan came to Do Hwan, alone, without his assistant, without his sword. He sat down by the fire. Do Hwan poured him some tea. The Inquisitor drank in silence. Then he spoke, quietly, like a man speaking not out of duty but out of conscience. He said he had found no violations, that the skeletons had caused no harm, that the houses stood firm, that the residents were satisfied, that the memorial rite did not contradict the temple's canons because such a rite simply does not exist in the canons. Then he said he would write a report, a clean one, without accusations. But he warned us. The complaint didn't come from the residents. It came from the Builders Guild through an intermediary in the temple. The guild has people in the temple, and they'll try again. The Inquisitor finished his tea. He stood up. He looked down at Do Hwan, a boy, 15 years old. Dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, calluses on his palms like those of an old stonemason. The Inquisitor said one last thing. He said that 200 years ago, when the cathedral in the capital was being built, the chief architect used bone workers. This was recorded in the temple's old chronicles, which are now sealed away in the archives. Do Hwan raised his head. The Inquisitor said nothing more. He turned and walked off into the darkness. Do Hwan sat by the fire and thought. 200 years ago, bone workers, sealed chronicles. It was a clue, a small one, but an important one. He remembered it. So-Rin approached and sat down beside him. She asked what the Inquisitor had said. Do Hwan told her. So-Rin fell deep in thought. Then she said that there had been a professor at the Royal School of Architects, an old man, a strange one. He once mentioned in a lecture that the ancient fortresses of Haran were built using technologies that no longer exist, that the stones in them were fitted with a precision that no modern stonemason could replicate, that the mortar used in them wasn't mortar at all, but something else. The professor was suspended for that lecture. So-Rin remembered it. Do Hwan stared into the fire. Ancient fortresses, bone workers, forgotten technologies. The thread stretched off into the depths somewhere. He didn't know where yet, but he felt it was important. The 9th month, 50 skeletons. Do Hwan found a third battlefield 2 days' journey to the south. Large, old, about 50 years old. 2 baronies had clashed here over a mine. There were enough bones for 20 new workers. He performed a ritual on each one, bowed, offered water, spoke the words. 50 skeletons, that's no longer just a crew. It was a small enterprise. Do Hwan reorganized everything. 10 teams of 5, 2 teams for earthwork, 2 for masonry, 2 for roofing, 1 for carpentry, 1 for transportation, 1 for finishing, 1 in reserve. Kang Ara kept track of each team. The logbook grew as thick as a fist. Yun Mei restructured the logistics. 3 regular suppliers, stone from the quarries, lumber from the loggers, lime from the kiln that Do Hwan built himself on the riverbank. Nails and staples from blacksmith Moon Chol of Tangpo, with whom Yun Mei had signed a 1-year contract. So-Rin stopped drawing on wooden boards. Yun Mei brought her paper, real paper, white paper. So-Rin held the first sheet and her hands were trembling. She had never worked on good paper before. At the School of Architects, the students were given scraps. Real paper was for real architects, men. Do Hwan told her that she was a real architect and that she should draw. So-Rin drew. She signed every project. So-Rin, architect. For the first time in her life, her name appeared on a drawing. So-Rin's first major project was a bridge across the Hagen River. Not a pedestrian bridge, a freight bridge, for carts. Stone piers, wooden decking, wide enough for 2 carts side by side. The client was County Judge Im Hyun Chol, a heavy-set man with a kind face and shrewd eyes. He needed the bridge because the old one had been washed away by a flood 3 years earlier, and merchants were bypassing his county. He was losing tax revenue. Do Hwan named his price, 40 gold pieces. The magistrate haggled. Yun Mei haggled back. They haggled for 2 hours. They settled on 35. Do Hwan left them and went to inspect the riverbanks. So-Rin went with him. The Hagen River was wide but shallow at this point. The riverbed was rocky. The current was moderate. The banks were gentle. A good spot for a bridge. So-Rin crouched down by the water. She dipped her hand in. She touched the bottom. Rock. Solid. A good foundation. She began sketching right on the bank, tracing with her wet finger across a flat rock. 3 piers, 2 spans, streamlined stone abutments designed to prevent debris from accumulating during floods. Do Hwan stood nearby and made corrections. He said the abutments should be placed at an angle to the current, not perpendicular to it. So-Rin asked why. He explained. A pier placed at an angle cuts through the current. Water flows around it on both sides. The pressure on the pier is reduced by 1/3. During a flood, that's the difference between a bridge that stands and one that's swept away. So-Rin looked at him. Then she quietly asked how he knew all this. Do Hwan remained silent. He couldn't tell her. Not now. Maybe later. Maybe never. It took 3 weeks to build the bridge. 50 skeletons worked in 2 shifts, day and night. Do Hwan lived on the riverbank. He slept 4 hours a night. His mana replenishment had increased. 50 skeletons devoured his energy like 50 stoves devour firewood. Every morning after replenishment, he sat on a rock and waited for the dizziness to pass. A minute, 2. 5. Longer with each passing day. Kang Ada noticed. She kept track of his mana consumption. The numbers didn't lie. His consumption was rising. His recovery was slowing down. Do Hwan was burning out. She came to him that evening, with dinner. She sat down next to him, set down a bowl, rice, fish, vegetables. Do Hwan ate. Kang Ara remained silent. Then she said he needed to reduce the number of skeletons on the site. Put some of them on standby. Get more sleep. Eat better. Do Hwan said he couldn't. Deadlines. Kang Ara said deadlines were meaningless if he collapsed unconscious.
unconscious. If he loses consciousness for more than a day, all the skeletons will crumble. The entire construction project rests on one person, and that person is killing himself. Do Hwan wanted to object, but he looked at Kang Ada. She was looking at him, not like a manager looking at an employee, not like an older sister looking at a younger brother, but somehow differently. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before, or perhaps he hadn't noticed it. He said she was right. Kang Ada nodded. She put the bowl away. Then she paused in the doorway. She turned around. She said she would personally keep an eye on his schedule, that he would sleep for at least 6 hours, that he would eat 3 times a day, that if he broke the rules, she would take away his drawing charcoal. Do Hwan smiled. Kang Ada didn't smile. She wasn't joking. The bridge was ready in 22 days. Sturdy, wide, beautiful. Stone bulls stood at an angle to the current, and the river flowed gently around them. The wooden deck could support 2 loaded carts side by side. There were railings on both sides, so Rin added a simple carved pattern to the railings: waves, fish, and river stones. Judge Im Hyun Chol came in person to inspect the bridge. He walked back and forth across it. He stamped his foot. He looked down. He touched the railing. He turned to Do Hwan and asked if he could build another one in the neighboring county. His son-in-law was also a judge and also lacked a bridge. Do Hwan said he could. Yun Mei quoted a price. The judge didn't haggle. Orders continued to grow. By the 10th month, Do Hwan's workshop was serving an area spanning 6 townships. 4 projects at once: houses, bridges, granaries, mills. Do Hwan no longer had to run back and forth between job sites. Kang Ara developed a system. Each team of laborers was assigned a live foreman. Moon Dok-soo, an elderly mason, led the masonry crew. Han Jae-woo, a young carpenter, led the carpentry crew. Park Eun-hee, a widow in charge of bricks, managed the production section. The foremen knew their tasks. The skeleton workers carried them out. Do Hwan visited the site every other day. He checked. He made corrections. He left. So-rin traveled with him. Together, they inspected every site. They argued. They found solutions. In the evenings, they returned to the workshop. So-rin went to the drafting table. Do Hwan went to the fire. Yun Mei brought tea and the daily report. Kang Ara brought the ledger. 4 people. Different. Unalike. But together, they worked like a single mechanism, and that mechanism was building. In the 11th month, a girl from Machon arrived. Lee Su-ah, 17 years old, the daughter of village head Park Tae-soo. She arrived at the workshop in the morning, a clean dress, her hair braided, a bundle in her hands. Do Hwan remembered her, the little girl who had stood by the fence, staring at the skeletons with her mouth agape on that first day when he left Machon. Not a little girl anymore, 17, but the same expression in her eyes, curiosity without fear. Lee Su-ah unwrapped the bundle. Inside were drawings, in pencil on scraps of paper. Drawings of houses, not blueprints, just drawings. Naive, crooked, but with an understanding of form that couldn't be faked. She had been drawing houses ever since Do Hwan built the first house in Machon. Every evening, in secret, on the backs of her father's abacus beads. She said she wanted to study, that she wanted to draw like So-rin, that she wanted to build. Do Hwan looked at So-rin. So-rin looked at the drawings, for a long time. Then she raised her head. She nodded. A week later, Lee Su-ah was sitting next to So-rin at the drafting table, learning the difference between a floor plan and an elevation. She was a quick learner, eagerly, like someone who'd gone hungry their whole life and was finally allowed to sit at the table. So-rin was a strict teacher, a quiet one. She'd demonstrate something once. She'd wait for her student to remember. Lee Su-ah remembered. She made mistakes. She redid it. So-rin didn't praise her, but one evening, Do Hwan saw So-rin place a new pencil on Lee Su-ah's desk. A good one, from the capital, without a word. Lee Su-ah pressed the pencil to her chest and smiled in a way that made Do Hwan's heart tighten. She reminded him of the intern, that boy on the roof.
The one he'd pushed out of the way of a flying sheet of corrugated metal. Young, hungry for work, believing that the world could be bigger than what he saw. Lee Su-ah worked as a drafting assistant. She redrew So-rin's designs in whiteout. She carried the blueprints to the job sites. She checked the measurements on site. She jotted down the foreman's comments. She ran back and forth between the workshop and the job sites with a wooden tube for scrolls slung over her back. The village of Machon looked at her with bewilderment. The village headman's daughter, working with a skinny boy, running around construction sites, her hands covered in soot, her knees caked in clay, unmarried, 17 years old. It was about time. Village Chief Park Tae-soo came to see Do Hwan that evening. He sat down next to him. He was silent for a long time. Then he asked what he was doing with his daughter. Do Hwan replied that he was teaching her to draw blueprints. The village chief asked why. A woman doesn't need blueprints. A woman needs a husband and a home. Do Hwan looked at the village chief, calmly, without a hint of defiance. He said that Li Sua was talented, that she had an eye for form, that she could become a good architect if given time. He said that a home and a husband wouldn't go anywhere, but talent could be lost if it wasn't nurtured. The village head remained silent. Then he stood up. He left. The next day, he brought his daughter a new work jacket. His own, an old one, altered. Li Sua put it on and never took it off again. Toward the end of the 11th month, something happened that changed everything. An envoy arrived at the workshop. Not from the baron, not from the judge, from the count. Count Quan Song Ho, owner of 2 counties and 1 city, wealthy, influential, one of the 12 counts of the southern province. The envoy was dressed in fine clothes. He spoke politely. He brought a letter bearing the count's seal. Count Quan Song Ho wanted to build a settlement, not a house, not a barn, a settlement, 40 houses, a school, a well, a road, for the refugees from the southern lands who had poured into his county after the last earthquake. People were living in tent camps. They were sick. They were dying. The count was tired of the complaints. The Builders Guild had requested 1,000 gold pieces and 2 years of labor. The count had heard of the bone builder. He wanted to know the price and the timeline. Do Hwan read the letter. 40 houses. A school, a well, a road. He sat down at the table. So Rin sat down beside him. Yun Mei sat down as well. Kong Ara stood behind them with a magazine. They worked until midnight. So Rin laid out standard designs from their library. Single-family home. Version 3. Tried and tested. Built 5 times. Every detail worked out. Modular construction. Foundation. 3 days. Walls. 5 days. Roof. 3 days. Finishing touches. 2 days. Total, 13 days per house. 50 frames. 10 sections. Parallel work. 5 houses at the same time. 40 houses in 3.5 months. Plus a school, plus a well, plus a road. 4 months, maybe 5. Yun Mei calculated the costs. Materials, logistics, margin, total. 400 gold. Kong Ara checked the schedules. Mana consumption. The strain on Do Hwan. She said he wouldn't last 5 months working non-stop with 50 skeletons. She said he needed to reduce the number to 35. Extend the time frame to 6 months, or find a way to reduce mana consumption. Do Hwan thought. 6 months is a long time. The count might not agree, but Kong Ara is right. If he collapses in the 3rd month, the entire construction project will grind to a halt. All 40 foundations will turn into useless pits, he decided. 6 months. 450 gold pieces. Sorin asked why it was more than they had calculated. Do Hwan said the extra 50 were for unforeseen expenses. Every construction project has them. The soil might turn out to be worse than expected. A supplier might let them down. The rainy season might drag on. You always need a reserve. In his past life, he set aside 10%. Here, he set aside a little more. The world is unpredictable. Yun Mei wrote a reply to the count. Do Hwan signed it. The messenger left. The reply arrived a week later. The count agreed on one condition. He wanted to see the construction site in person. He wanted to come and watch the bone builder at work. Do Hwan agreed. Let him look. He had nothing to hide. But he knew that the count's visit wasn't just a visit. It was an inspection. And not just by the count. When the count sets his caravan in motion toward the construction site, everyone will find out. The entire province, the entire Builders Guild, the entire Temple of Light. A bone boy from Muchan is taking on a contract for an entire village. 450 gold pieces. This isn't just a shed or a granary anymore. This is a bid, a real one, a high-profile one. So Rin worked on the master plan for the village.
She drew by night, not because Do Hwan had asked her to, because she couldn't stop. This was her chance, the first project of her life for an entire settlement. Not 1 house, not 2, 40, plus public buildings, plus a road, plus the street layout. She spread the sheets out on the workshop floor and crawled over them on her knees. She moved houses around. She turned streets this way and that. She searched for the optimal orientation relative to the sun and wind. Do Hwan crawled alongside her. They argued over the location of the well. He said it should be in the center. She said it should be on high ground so the water would flow down the natural slope. He stopped. He looked at her. She was right. The well on high ground. The simplest gravity-fed water supply system. No pumps needed. No magic needed. Just physics. Sorin looked at him and smiled quietly. She liked being right. She liked that he acknowledged it. Kan Ara stood in the doorway, watching the two of them crawling across the floor amid the blueprints.
Her face wore an expression she herself couldn't quite name. She waited for him every evening, with dinner, with tea, with the logbook. She told herself it was work, that she was the manager, and looking after her boss's health was part of her duties. But she prepared his dinner the way one builds a house, with attention to detail. The fish he loves, rice not too dry, tea not too hot. She remembered. She remembered everything, and she was angry at herself for remembering. Hwan hadn't noticed. Or maybe he had but didn't show it. He was busy. Count Kwan's settlement. 40 houses, 6 months. This was his first real test. Not a shed, not a granary, not a bridge, an entire settlement, from scratch, according to a single plan. If he succeeded, he would prove that his system worked, that skeletons could build not just individual buildings, but entire cities, that a necromancer could be a blessing rather than a curse. If he failed, everything he'd built over the past year would crumble faster than his skeletons. The site for the settlement lay in a valley between 2 hills, about 5 li south of Count Kwan's county seat. A good spot, sheltered from the north wind, a stream with clean water, a forest on the western slope, a rocky ridge to the east, building materials close at hand. It took Do Hwan half a day to walk around the valley. He measured it in steps, he counted in his head, he estimated the slopes, he tested the soil. He dug holes with a shovel. The soil turned out to be mixed. Loam in the north, sandstone in the south, bedrock closer to the eastern ridge. Different soil means different foundations. Rin walked beside him with a rope, measuring tape, and stakes. She marked out the streets. The main road running south to north, 2 cross streets, a well on the hill in the center, a school next to the well, houses on both sides of the streets, windows facing south, all of them, every single one. Hwan insisted on it. South-facing windows mean light and warmth. They save firewood in the winter. They lift the residents' spirits. In his past life, he'd built houses with south-facing windows and knew that people in them got sick less often and smiled more. Here, no one would believe him if he said that out loud, so he simply installed south-facing windows. The first houses were laid out at the beginning of the 12th month, exactly 1 year after Do Hwan woke up on straw in a village temple. 1 year. In a single year, he'd gone from being an outcast boy with just 1 skeleton to a contractor earning 450 gold pieces. But there was no time to think about that. The work wouldn't wait. 50 laborers took their positions, 10 teams, 5 houses at once, an assembly line. Do Hwan had mastered the system to the point of second nature. The first team digs the foundation for house number 1. The second team hauls stone for house number 2. The third team lays the walls of house number 3. The fourth team puts the roof on house number 4. The fifth team plastered house number 5. When the first team finishes the foundation of house number 1, it moves on to house number 6. The second team moves on to house number 1, and so on. A flow, uninterrupted. Each team performs one task and moves on. So Rin called it Do Hwan's conveyor belt. Do Hwan smiled. In his past life, it was called the assembly line method. It had been invented long before his time, but here, he was the first. Count Kwan Seong Ho arrived in the 3rd week, with security, with his steward, with 2 curious nobles from the neighboring county. They stood on the hill and looked down. 50 skeletons were working in the valley, silently, steadily, without pause. Stone walls were rising simultaneously in 5 places. The clatter of hammers merged into a single steady rhythm. Living people walked among the skeletons. Moon Dok-soo was inspecting the masonry. Han Jae-woo was planing window frames.
Park Eun-hee and the children were unloading a cart of bricks. Lee Soo-ah was running around with a tube, handing out blueprints to the foreman. Do Hwan stood in the middle of the site with a stick and checking the verticality of the wall of house number 8. The count came down. He walked around the site, in silence. His steward was feeling the walls, tapping them, peering into the foundation pits, checking the mortar. The count stopped at house number 3. The walls were finished. The roof wasn't yet. He went inside. He touched the window opening, ran his finger along the masonry. The joint was thin and even. The stones were fitted tightly together, not a single crack. The count turned to Do Hwan. He asked how much a single house cost. Do Hwan replied, 11 gold pieces, including materials and labor. The count was silent for a moment. His steward quietly remarked that the Builders Guild charged 40 for such a house and built it worse. The count nodded. Then he asked about something else. He asked why every house had a different floor plan. Do Hwan replied that each house was built for a specific family. So Rin talks to each one. She asks how many children they have, who is sick, what they do for a living, where they get cold in the winter, and she designs the house to suit those people. Here's a house for a blacksmith, thick walls next to the forge. Here's a house for a large family, 6 nooks for the children and a shared dining room. Here's a house for an elderly man with bad legs, a low threshold, wide doors.
A bench by the entrance so they can take off their shoes while sitting. The Count listened. His expression changed. First curiosity, then surprise, then something resembling understanding. He asked who had come up with the bench for the old man. Do Hwan pointed to So-rin. So-rin was standing by the drafting table with a piece of charcoal in her hand, and her cheeks red from the wind. The Count approached her. He bowed. So-rin was taken aback. No one had ever bowed to her before, least of all a Count. The Count said he wanted her to design a summer pavilion for him at his estate. So-rin looked at Do Hwan. Do Hwan nodded. Yun-mei named the price before anyone had a chance to speak. The Count didn't haggle. The Count's visit had consequences. 2 nobles from a neighboring county left with him. A week later, both sent in orders. One was for a house. The other was for a stable and a fence.
Another week later, an order arrived from the city magistrate. Repairs to the fortress wall. Yun-mei stacked the letters and counted them. Do Hwan looked at the stack and thought. Construction of the settlement was proceeding on schedule. Houses were going up one after another, but he didn't have enough hands. Living hands. The skeletons did the rough work perfectly, but the fine work required people. Moon Dok-soo couldn't manage on his own. Han Jae-woo worked for 2 but was alone. More masons were needed. Carpenters, plasterers, roofers. They needed people who would come to work for the Necromancer. Kang Ara took on this task. She traveled through the villages. She talked to people. She didn't try to persuade them. She explained. Wages, housing, food, year-round work. No beatings, no fines for getting sick, no deductions for tools. Conditions that no other contractor in the province offered. The first to come were those who had nowhere else to go. An old carpenter with a broken arm whom the guild had expelled because of his disability. A young man from a mountain village where there was no work. A female plasterer who wasn't hired on construction sites because she was a woman. They arrived wary. The skeletons were frightening. The necromancer was frightening. But the wages weren't frightening. And a house they could live in wasn't frightening either. Kang Ara greeted each one. She recorded them in a log. She showed them their workstation. She explained the rules. 2 rules. Work honestly. Respect the labor of others, whether they're alive or dead. By the 3rd month of construction, 12 living craftsmen and 50 skeletons were working on the site. So-rin handled the design. Do Hwan built. Yun-mei procured materials and handled sales. Kang Ara managed. Lee Su-ah studied and helped wherever she could. The settlement grew. House after house, street after street, foundations that won't sink, walls that won't let the wind through, roofs that will withstand the snow, south-facing windows, stoves that don't smoke. Do Hwan walked around the site and looked. 20 houses completed, 20 under construction. The school's foundation has been laid, the well has been dug, the road has been marked out. In 3 months, people will be living here. Families, children, the elderly. They'll wake up in warm homes, walk to school along a smooth road, drink clean water, and maybe in a year they'll forget that these walls were built by dead hands. Or maybe they won't forget, and they'll tell their children that once upon a time a boy made of bone came and built a city for them. One evening, a woman, in a white cloak with the hood pulled down over her head. Do Hwan hadn't seen her face. She stood by the road and looked at the construction site. Skeletons were working by torchlight. Hammers were clanging. Stone clattered against stone. Kang Ara noticed her first. She walked over. She asked who she was and what she wanted. The woman pulled back her hood. A young face. Pale. Dark circles under her eyes. Traces of tears. She said her name was Han Mi-ran. That she was a priestess of the Temple of Light. A former one. That she had left the order. That she knew the temple was lying about necromancers. That she was looking for the bone builder. Kang Ara led her to Do Hwan. Han Mi-ran stood before him and spoke in an even voice. Without a tremor. Without tears. Though the tears had not yet dried on her cheeks. She had been a priestess healer at the city temple. 6 years of service. For 6 years, she had healed people and believed she was serving a good cause. 3 months ago, she found an old scroll in the temple archives. Sealed. She wasn't supposed to read it, but she did. The scroll contained a description of the Bone Keepers, an ancient caste of builders who used skeletons to construct buildings. Not weapons, not war. Construction, fortresses, bridges, cities. 1,000 years ago, they were the most respected class on the continent. Then the Temple of Light declared them heretics, wiped them out, erased them from history, declared the undead to be absolute evil, and turned everything upside down. Do Hwan listened, silently. Inquisitor Zhang Guan had spoken of the same thing. 200 years ago. Bone workers. Sealed chronicles. Han Mi-ran continued. She had found 2 more scrolls. One contained a map, an old one, partially erased. It marked the fortresses built by the Bone Keepers. 6 fortresses. 4 of them still stand today,
They're considered a wonder of the world. No one knows how they were built. The second scroll contained a fragment of the Bonekeeper's charter. A few lines. Among them one, "We build for the living with the hands of the dead, and there is no sin in this, for the dead serve those who will live after them." Do Hwan closed his eyes. He opened them. Han Mi-ran was looking at him. She said she had left the temple because she could not serve a lie.
That she had come to him because he was doing what the Bonekeepers had done, building for people, with the hands of the dead, without sin. Do Hwan was silent for a moment. Then he asked what she could do. Han Mi-ran said she could heal wounds, fractures, fevers, 6 years of practice. Do Hwan nodded. He said that fingers often got broken on his construction site. Living workers, heavy stones, sharp tools. He said he needed a doctor. Han Mi-ran stood motionless, then her shoulders slumped. The tension faded. She had expected questions, accusations, distrust. He offered her a job, just a job. As if former priestesses showed up at a construction site every day asking to be hired. Do Hwan said he would build her a small infirmary next to the workshop, with a chapel if she wanted. She could pray however she wanted and to whomever she wanted. He didn't interfere with other people's faith. Han Mi-ran looked at him, a boy, 16 years old, dirty, tired, with the calluses of an old bricklayer on his childish palms. She said quietly that for the first time in 3 months she felt like she could breathe. Do Hwan nodded. He turned to Kang Ada. He told her to make a note in the log. Han Mi-ran, doctor, full-time staff, salary equivalent to a foreman's. Kang Ada wrote it down, without asking any questions. So-rin was already sketching out a plan for the clinic, a small one, with 2 wards, with a chapel in the annex, with windows facing east. Do Hwan looked at his team: So-rin, Yunmei, Kang Ada, Lee Sua, Han Mi-ran. 5 of them. Each had come to him because they had nowhere else to go. Each had found here what she hadn't found anywhere else. A place of their own. He built houses for others, and they built a home around him, and he didn't realize it yet. Count Kwan's village was completed in the 5th month, a month ahead of schedule. 40 houses, a school, a well on the hill with a gravity-fed water supply, a stone-paved road, Han Mi-ran clinic with a chapel, a small market at the intersection of 2 streets. Do Hwan stood on the hill and looked down. The village lay in the valley, spread out before him like the palm of his hand. Straight streets, houses identical in size but different in detail. Windows facing south, every house. Chimneys stretched into the morning sky in neat columns. So-rin stood beside him. She was silent. She looked at what they had built, the first settlement in her life built from scratch. Her blueprints had become stone and wood. Her lines had become walls and roofs. Under these roofs, children she had never seen would sleep. She didn't cry, but her chin trembled. Do Hwan noticed but said nothing. The refugees began arriving that very day, in families, carrying bundles, with children in their arms, with eyes so full of weariness that they no longer believed what they were seeing. One woman stood at the threshold of her house and couldn't bring herself to go inside. Kang Ara approached her, took her by the hand, led her inside, showed her the rooms, showed her the stove, showed her the south-facing window. The woman sat down on the floor and said quietly that her old house didn't have a floor. Just dirt, just dirt. The children used to crawl on the ground. Now she had a floor, smooth, wooden, warm. An old man with sore feet entered his house and immediately sat down on the bench by the entrance, the very one that So-rin had designed. A low threshold, wide doors, and a bench. He took off his shoes while sitting. He touched the threshold. He looked at Do Hwan. He said nothing, but he stood up and bowed. Count Kwan Sung-ho was informed that the village was ready. He arrived the next day. He walked around every house, every single one, all 40 of them. His steward followed behind and took notes. The count stopped at the school. He went inside. The school was a 1-story building, stone walls, large windows, a blackboard on the wall, rows of benches, a small room for the teacher in the back. The count asked who would be teaching. Do Hwan said that wasn't his job. He was in charge of construction. The count nodded. Then he turned to his steward and told him to find a teacher by next month. The count paid in full, 450 gold pieces, and gave a bonus, 50 on top of that for early completion. Yunmei counted the money 3 times. Then she carefully put it away in the chest. She sat down next to the chest and said quietly that she had never held so much gold in her hands in her entire life. Do Hwan said that it wasn't his gold. It was the guild's gold. Yunmei looked at him. She asked which guild. Do Hwan paused. Then he said, "The White Bone Guild." The name hung in the air. So-rin looked up.
Kang Ara stopped writing in her journal. Lee Su-ah froze with a pencil in her hand. Han Mi-ran stood in the doorway, staring at him. Yun-mei was the first to react. She asked if it was a joke or if he was serious.
Do Hwan said he was serious, that it was time. That they were no longer just a workshop made up of tents and sheds, that they had 50 skeletons, 15 living workers, 5 completed large-scale projects, and 60 small ones, that they had an architect, a financier, a manager, a doctor, and apprentices, that they needed a name, bylaws, a seal, status, a license. Yun-mei said they wouldn't grant a license, that the Haran Builders Guild controls the issuance of licenses, that they would never approve a competitor, especially not a necromancer. Do Hwan said that licenses are issued not by the guild, but by the royal chancellery. The guild only makes recommendations, but a recommendation isn't binding. If the application is supported by 3 nobles of a rank no lower than baron, the chancellery is obligated to consider it. He had studied the laws. 2 months of evenings in Baron Namgondu's library. Every scroll, every decree. Yun-mei opened her mouth, then closed it. She did the math on her abacus. Baron Namgondu, Judge Im Hyun-chol, who formerly held the title of Baron, Count Kwan Song-ho, whose title outweighed that of 10 barons, 3 signatures. Yun-mei smiled, predatorily, broadly. She said she would draft a petition by morning. By morning, the petition was ready. Kang Ara checked every line, so Rin drew the seal, a white skull against a backdrop of stonework, bone and stone, the dead in the service of the living. Do Hwan looked at the seal and nodded. Han Mi-ran added a separate sheet to the petition, a historical background on the Keepers of Bones, an ancient caste of builders, and the fortresses that have stood for 1,000 years. She didn't name her source. She didn't mention the sealed scrolls, just facts, dry, precise. Let the chancellery decide for itself what to do with them. The petition was sent off with the courier Yun-mei. Do Hwan knew the answer wouldn't come soon. The chancellery works slowly, but the process had been set in motion, and the Builders Guild would find out about this. Soon. They found out 2 weeks later. The response didn't come from the chancellery. The response came in the form of 50 armed men on horseback, mercenaries, in leather armor, carrying short swords and crossbows. The squad commander delivered a verbal message. Master Park Jung-il, head of the southern branch of the Builders Guild, demands an immediate meeting with the bone contractor. No team, no skeletons, one-on-one. Do Hwan listened. Yun-mei said it was a trap. Kang Ara said he shouldn't go, so Rin was silent, but her hands were trembling. Han Mi-ran clenched her fists. Lee Su-ah turned pale. Do Hwan looked at the mercenary commander. He asked where the meeting would take place. The commander replied, "An old quarry 10 li to the east, tomorrow at dawn." Do Hwan said he'd be there. The commander nodded. He turned the squad around. They left. Yun-mei grabbed Do Hwan by the sleeve. She said he wouldn't go, that she wouldn't let him, that she hadn't invested a year of her life just so he could go and die in a quarry. Her voice trembled, not out of anger, out of fear. Do Hwan gently removed her hand from his sleeve. He said he wouldn't go alone, that he'd take 20 skeletons with him, not for battle, for work. Yun-mei didn't understand. Do Hwan didn't bother to explain. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the workshop and thought, not about the meeting, about the quarry. He knew that quarry. He'd been there. He'd picked up stone for construction sites, old, abandoned, deep. 3 levels of excavation. The walls were crumbling. The ceiling was held up by 6 stone pillars. 2 of them had cracked. If they were removed, the ceiling would sag. If it sagged the wrong way, it would crush everyone inside. But if it sagged the right way, Do Hwan kept sketching until dawn. At dawn, Do Hwan left the workshop. 20 skeletons followed him. Each carried a tool, pickaxes, shovels, ropes, wooden wedges, not weapons, tools. So Rin was waiting at the gate. She said she was coming with him. Do Hwan said no. So Rin looked at him in a way that made him fall silent. She said that if he were killed, there would be no one left to finish the projects, and that as an architect, she was obligated to be present during the inspection the quarries. It was nonsense, and they both knew it. But Do Hwan nodded. Kang Ara approached. She handed him a bundle, breakfast, rice, fish, an egg. She told him to eat on the way and not to face the enemy on an empty stomach. Yun Mei stood on the porch and didn't say a word. She just watched. Do Hwan waved at her. Yun Mei didn't wave back. She turned away and went into the house. He heard something clink inside, either an abacus or a cup. The quarry lay in a rocky ravine between two hills. The entrance was wide and semicircular. The gray granite walls were scarred with tool marks. Inside, it was dark and damp. 10 mercenaries stood at the entrance, armed and on high alert. Do Hwan stopped the skeletons 100 paces from the entrance. He told them to wait. They froze. 20 skeletons with tools stood motionless, like 20 strange statues. The mercenary commander stepped out. He said the magister was inside. He said the skeletons were to remain outside. Do Hwan nodded, so Brennan stepped up beside him. They entered. The quarry was larger inside than it appeared from the outside. 3 tiers stretched deep into the earth. The ceiling was lost in the twilight. Torches along the walls cast a dim yellow light. 6 stone pistols supported the vaulted ceiling. Do Hwan looked at them. 2 had cracks. He remembered that. But now he noticed something else. The 3rd pillar was also damaged. A micro crack at the base. Barely visible, but it was there. Master Park Jong-il sat on a stone block in the center of the hall. An elderly man. Withered. His face was soft and loose, like dough. His small eyes were lost in the folds of his eyelids. His hands rested on his knees. The hands of a stonemason. Broad, gnarled, with calluses that wouldn't go away even after 30 years of desk work. Once, this man had been a builder. Once, he had been exactly what Do Hwan was now. 4 people stood beside the master. 2 assistants in guild cloaks. 2 mercenaries with swords. The master looked at Do Hwan for a long time. Then he spoke, quietly, wearily, without threats, without rage. He said he had seen Count Kwan's settlement. He had traveled there in person, walked the streets, touched the walls, tapped the masonry, inspected every corner of every house. 40 houses, all even, all sturdy, all different. Do Hwan listened. The master continued. He said that the masonry in the houses was better than in half the buildings his guild had completed over the past year. That the foundations were deeper and more precise. That he had never seen roof truss designs like these in any textbook. That the drainage system around the settlement was pure magic. Not the magic of mages, the magic of knowledge. Do Hwan remained silent. The master stood up. He stepped closer. His voice grew softer. He said that 30 years ago he had built bridges, by himself, with his own hands. He mixed the mortar. He laid the stones. He fitted the blocks. Those were good times. Then he was promoted, made an inspector, then a senior inspector, then a deputy master, then a master. With each step up the ladder, he moved further away from the stone, and closer to paperwork, to money, to intrigue. 30 years. He'd forgotten the smell of fresh mortar, forgotten the sound of a hammer striking stone. He'd forgotten the feel of smooth masonry beneath his fingers. He'd become a fat bureaucrat who decides who gets to build and who doesn't, and takes a cut for it. Do Hwan listened without interrupting. The master fell silent. Then he explained why he'd summoned him. He was proposing a deal. The Whitebone Guild would receive a license, without any obstacles. The master would personally sign the recommendation. In exchange, Do Hwan would take the southern branch of the Builders Guild under his wing, absorb it, retrain it, restructure it, give the old masters work, not throw them out onto the street, not seek revenge. Yun Mei would have said this was a capitulation with conditions, and she would have been right. Do Hwan thought. The master waited. So Rin stood nearby, keeping an eye on the mercenaries out of the corner of her eye. They didn't move. Do Hwan asked one thing. He asked why. Why was the master giving up? He could still fight. He had money, connections, mercenaries, the temple. The master looked at his hands, those very hands of a stonemason. He said quietly that he had seen Count Kwan's settlement and realized he hadn't lost to some boy necromancer. He'd lost to himself, to that young stonemason who, 30 years ago, had built bridges and been happy. Do Hwan was silent. Then he nodded. He said he accepted, with one condition. The master would come to the site himself, in person. He'll stand against the wall. He'll show what he can do. The master blinked. Then something strange appeared on his weathered face, something long forgotten. Do Hwan turned toward the exit. He stopped. He looked up at the quarry ceiling, at the cracks in the pillars. He turned back to the master and said that he needed to reinforce the second and third pillars, that the cracks were widening, that in a year the ceiling would collapse, that if the master wanted, he'd send some skeletons, for free. The master looked at him. Then he laughed quietly. For the first time during the entire conversation, he said that the boy had come to meet the enemy, and instead of being afraid, he was inspecting the ceiling for cracks. Do Hwan shrugged. He said that cracks in load-bearing structures don't wait for people to finish sorting out their differences. Rin stood nearby, pressing her lips together to keep from smiling. They stepped out of the quarry into the sunlight. 20 skeletons were standing there, with their tools, ready to work. Do Hwan looked at them. He looked at So-Rin. He said they needed to head back. There was a lot of work to do. So-Rin nodded. Then she quietly said he was crazy. Do Hwan asked why. So-Rin said that normal people go to face the enemy and think about how to survive. He came and thought about how to fix the ceiling. Do Hwan thought for a moment. He said that the ceiling was indeed in poor condition. So-Rin shook her head, but she was smiling. The Whitebone Guild received its license 6 weeks later. The Royal Chancellery reviewed the petition bearing 4 signatures: Baron Nam Gon-du, Judge Im Hyun-chol, Count Kwon Sung-ho, and Master Park Jung-il on behalf of the southern branch of the Haran Builders Guild. The 4th signature settled everything. The Chancellery couldn't refuse when the guild itself had recommended it. The seal arrived by courier, a white skull against a backdrop of stonework. So-Rin held it in her hands, and her fingers were trembling. Yoon-Mei took the seal. She made the first impression on a blank sheet of paper. She looked at it. Clear. Beautiful. It was official. The White Bone Guild, the first construction organization in the history of Haran, founded by a necromancer. Khan Ara opened a new journal, blank, thick. On the first page, she wrote the date, year 1, day 1. Do Hwan stood to the side, thinking about how, in his past life, he had co-owned a company with 12 employees and tenders for 5 projects a year. Now he owned a guild licensed by the Royal Chancellery in a world where there were no concrete mixers, no excavators, and not even decent cement. But there were 200 skeletons. 200. In a year and a half, he'd reached his limit. Every morning, replenishing his mana drained him completely. He'd sit down on a rock after the ritual and wait for the world to stop spinning before his eyes. 10 minutes. 15. Sometimes 20. Kang Ara stood nearby, every morning, with a cup of broth, silently. She just stood there. He drank the broth, got up, went to work. 200 skeletons is an army. A small, quiet army that doesn't kill but builds. 3 branches in different provinces. The workshop in Machon became headquarters. The second branch opened in Count Kwon's county seat, the third in the coastal port town of Haegwon. Each branch was managed by a living foreman. Moon Dok-soo, an elderly mason, headed the eastern branch. His arthritis hadn't gone away, but his mind worked like clockwork. Han Jae-woo, a young carpenter who had once nearly had his hand cut off, headed the western branch. He was 17, the youngest foreman on the mainland. Master Park Jung-il arrived at the site as promised. On the first day, he stood and watched. On the second day, he picked up a trowel. On the third, he stood by the wall and began laying bricks. His hands remembered. 30 years behind a desk hadn't erased his muscles' memory. He laid them slowly, unevenly, worse than the scaffolding, but he laid them. Do Hwan approached him. He looked at the masonry. He said the joint was a bit too wide. The master looked at him. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from resentment, but from something else. He said he knew. He said he would fix it. And he did. By evening, his row was even. Not perfect, but even. Do Hwan nodded and said it was good enough. The master stayed. He worked every day, silently, stubbornly. He was losing weight. His hands were covered with new calluses on top of the old ones. A month later, his masonry was no worse than that of the skeletons. After 2 months, it was even better. Living hands do feel stone differently, after all. The master was right about that. The first human apprentices came with him, young masons from the old guild who wanted to learn rather than just rake in money. Do Hwan taught them. He demonstrated the joints. He explained the calculations. He sketched on the boards. So Rin led the design classes. Kang Ara put together the class schedule. Lee Sua became the senior student. She was already drawing her own plans. Not like So-Rin, simpler, but precise. Emily Walker showed up halfway through the second year, 20 years old, from across the sea, from the kingdom of Westmark, red-haired, lively, in stained overalls, with a bag stuffed with tools, half of which were homemade. She had sailed over on a merchant ship, 3 months at sea,
because she'd heard about the bone builder who had built a settlement with a gravitational aqueduct. Emily was a mechanical engineer, a specialist in water and wind-powered mechanisms. Back home in Westmark, no one listened to her. A female engineer, a curiosity, a funny quirk of Lord Walker, whose daughter plays with gears instead of doing embroidery. She walked into the workshop. She looked around. She saw So-rin's blueprints on the walls. She saw the skeletons in the courtyard. She saw the aqueduct on the model of the settlement. She walked over to the model. She crouched down.
She looked at it. Then she turned to Do Hwan and said in broken Heron that his aqueduct was crap. Do Hwan looked at her. Yun Mei dropped her abacus. Kang Ara raised an eyebrow. So-rin covered her mouth with her hand. Emily said that a gravity-fed water conduit was good, but primitive. What if they installed a water wheel with a lever system? Then they could lift water from the river up the hill instead of just letting it flow down the hill down. That the head would be 3 times higher. That they could build a water supply system, a real one, with pipes, with faucets, with pressure. Do Hwan listened. Then he asked if she could build it. Emily said she could if she were given a workshop and 10 skeletons. Do Hwan gave her a workshop and 10 skeletons. A month later, in Count Kwan's village, the first water supply system in the history of Hera began operating. Water flowed from wooden pipes straight into the houses. Not all of them, just 5 for now, but it flowed. Count Kwan Song Ho stood by the faucet and watched the water pour into a bucket. Then he turned to his manager and quietly said he was ready to double the contract. Emily became the head of the mechanical workshop. She swore in 2 languages. She argued with Do Hwan over every technical decision. He argued back. They were good arguments, debates between equals. Once, after a 3-hour debate about the diameter of the pipes, Emily suddenly fell silent. She looked at him. She said quietly that for the first time, she felt like she belonged. Do Hwan nodded. He said he knew that feeling. The Whitebone Guild was growing. 3 branches, 200 skeletons, 30 living masters, 6 apprentices. So-rin's architectural firm, Yun Mei's finance department, A-Ra's operations department, A-Ra's operations department, Emily's mechanical workshop, Han Mi-ran's infirmary, Li Su-a's drafting workshop, and 1 source of mana. Just 1. Do Hwan. 200 skeletons at their limit. Every morning he recharged them, and every morning the world grew darker at the edges. Kang Ara kept the ledger. The numbers didn't lie. He was burning out, slowly but surely. The epidemic struck without warning. A fever, acute, rapid. The village of Wolson, a 2-day journey to the south, 300 residents. The old barracks that served as a hospital couldn't accommodate even a third of the sick. People were lying in the street, in the rain, on the wet ground. Children, the elderly, pregnant women. The local lord refused to pay for a new hospital. His steward sent a letter to the Whitebone Guild. The letter was brief. Help. No money. Yun Mei read it. She looked at Do Hwan. She said it was charity, that they had paid commissions lined up, that every day of downtime was a loss of gold, that, as a financier, she couldn't recommend free work on such a scale. Do Hwan listened. Then he said he wasn't asking for her recommendation. Yun Mei fell silent. Her expression changed. She wanted to say something else. She didn't. She nodded. She turned away to her books. Do Hwan saw that her hands were trembling. Not out of anger. She knew he would go. She'd known it from the moment he took the letter. And she was afraid for him. Not for the money, for him. Do Hwan removed all the skeletons from the paid orders, all 200 of them. Yun Mei wrote to the clients. She apologized. She explained. 2 out of 3 clients replied that they understood. The 3rd threatened a penalty. Yun Mei replied to him herself. Do Hwan never found out exactly what she said, but there was no penalty. Do Hwan brought the 200 skeletons to Wolson by the evening of the 2nd day. The rain was pouring down in sheets, cold, autumn rain. The sick lay under awnings made of rags. Han Mi-ran arrived with him. She began her examination immediately, without rest, without food. She went from patient to patient, treating them with magic, with her hands and with her words. Her white cloak turned gray with dirt within an hour. Do Hwan began building that night, in the pouring rain, by torchlight. 200 skeletons took their positions. An infirmary, a full-fledged one, stone walls, a wooden roof, separate wards for the contagious, ventilation through air vents, just as he always did, plumbing based on Emily's design. Han Mi-ran's chapel in the annex. So-rin was drawing right out in the rain. The paper was getting soggy. She drew on planks. The planks were slippery. She drew on stones. Lee Sua held a canopy made from her cloak over her. Kang Ara organized the delivery of materials. In the middle of the night, along the muddy roads, Yun Mei rounded up 3 suppliers and promised each double pay if the stone and lumber arrived by dawn. The stone and lumber arrived by dawn. Emily assembled the water supply system in 6 hours, by hand, in the rain, swearing in 2 languages so loudly that the skeletons turned to look. Skeletons don't turn to look. But it seemed to her that they were turning around. 200 skeletons worked all night, and all day, and all night again, and all day again. 3 nights, 3 days. Do Hwan didn't sleep. He couldn't. The skeletons demanded control. 200 at once. At their limit. Mana was draining away like blood from an open wound. He could feel each one. Every single one of the 200. Their hands were his hands. Their movements were his movements. It was like controlling 200 bodies at once. By the 3rd night, he had lost sight in his right eye, then his left. The world became a gray blur dotted with the lights of torches. He kept going, by memory, by feel, by the sound of hammers. The infirmary was ready by dawn on the 4th day. Stone walls, a tiled roof, 12 wards, an operating room, a pharmacy, a water supply with 3 faucets, ventilation, stoves for heating, a chapel. That was it. Do Hwan stood at the entrance. His vision was slowly returning, blurry, out of focus. He saw patients being carried inside. He saw Han Mi-ran running down the hallway in a dirty raincoat. He saw Kang Ara arranging beds in the wards. He saw So-rin sitting on a rock by the entrance, her eyes and her face wet from the rain. Then the world swayed. The ground rose up toward him. Or perhaps he fell toward the ground. Mud. Cold. Wet. He lay face down in the mud at the entrance to the infirmary. 200 skeletons froze, all at once, like a machine whose motor had been turned off. Han Mi-ran found him. She turned him over. His face was gray. His pulse was barely detectable. His mana had completely. He was alive, but unconscious. Han Mi-ran dragged him inside. She couldn't do it alone. So-rin ran up. The 2 of them couldn't manage it. Kang Ara, Yun Mei, Lee Sua, Emily. 6 women dragged him through the mud toward the infirmary doors. The patients who could stand got up and helped. An old man with sore legs, a woman holding a baby, a boy of about 12. They dragged him together, the man who hadn't slept for 3 nights to build a roof over their heads. Do Hwan lay unconscious for 18 hours. 18. He had 24 hours left before his skeleton would crumble. 6 hours to spare. Kang Ara sat beside him and counted the time, minute by minute. So-rin sat on the other side and held his hand. Yun Mei stood by the window and watched the skeletons. 200 motionless skeletons stood in the rain, waiting, like faithful dogs at their master's door. Han Mi-ran poured healing magic into him, drop by drop. Carefully. His body was an empty vessel. You can't fill it too quickly. It'll crack. At the 18th hour, he opened his eyes, cloudy, red. He saw the ceiling, stone, familiar. He had built it. He turned his head. So-rin. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red from the tears she wouldn't allow herself to shed. She was holding his hand, tightly. He tried to sit up. Kang Ara placed her hand on his chest, gently, but firmly. She told him to lie down. He lay back down. He asked how much time had passed. Kang Ara said 18 hours. Then Hwan closed his eyes. 6 hours to spare. He'd nearly lost them all 200 of them. If he'd lain there for another 6 hours, all the skeletons would have crumbled to dust. His entire army. All his facilities. Everything he'd been building for a year and a half. Yun Mei approached. She sat down on the edge of the bed, silently. Then she said quietly that if he ever did something like that again, she would leave. Her voice didn't tremble. Her hands did. Do Hwan looked at her, then at So-rin, at Kang Ara, at Han Mi-ran in the doorway, at Lee Sua behind her, at Emily, who had walked in wet and dirty and froze when she saw that he had woken up. 6 faces, 6 women. Each had come to him because she had nowhere else to go. Each had stayed because she had found herself here. He had almost taken that away from them. With his stupidity, with his stubbornness, with his habit of shouldering everything himself. Do Hwan quietly said he wouldn't do that anymore. Yun Mei nodded. She stood up. She left. Behind the door, he heard her crying. Quietly, briefly. Then the sound stopped. The abacus clinked. She was counting. Do Hwan listened and smiled. The village of Wolsan then brought flowers to the infirmary's doors for a whole year. The rumor of the 3 nights spread across the continent faster than any decree. Another year passed. The second year of the Whitebone Guild. The year when everything fell into place. The city of Beckelson, Whitebone. The first city in the history of Haran built entirely according to a single plan. From scratch. On a blank canvas. A valley 2 days' journey south of Count Kwan's county seat. So Rin spent 4 months drawing up the master plan. She redrew it 6 times, until Do Hwan rejected the first 5. Not because they were bad, because they weren't good enough. For the people who would live here, they created the 6th version together, at night, on the workshop floor. Crawling on their knees across a huge sheet of paper, arguing until their voices were hoarse. They reached an agreement by dawn. The city was designed for 2,000 residents, 400 houses, a school, a clinic, city hall, a market, workshops, a park in the center, a sewer system based on a diagram Do Hwan drew from his memories of his past life, a water supply system based on Emily's design, straight streets, each wide enough for 2 carts, every house with south-facing windows. Do Hwan mobilized all available resources, 200 skeletons, 40 living craftsmen, all the apprentices. All 3 branches were working for Peckelson. It was the largest construction project in the history of the southern provinces, perhaps in the history of the continent. Kings usually took decades to build cities. Do Hwan planned to finish it in 8 months. Yun Mei secured the funding. 4 investors. Count Kwan Song Ho invested the most. 2 merchant houses, and one of the southern kings. Not the prince who wanted to lock Do Hwan in a golden cage. The other one. Old King Moon Ho from the west coast, who quietly sent a sack of gold and a note. Build me a city where people won't freeze. That's all. Do Hwan built, every day, from dawn till dusk. After the epidemic in Wolsan, he changed. He no longer tried to do everything on his own. He delegated. He trusted others. He slept 6 hours, as Kang Ara had ordered. He ate 3 meals a day, as she had demanded. He allowed Han Miran to check on him every week. He split his mana recharge into 2 stages, morning and evening. Not all 200 at once. 100 in the morning, 100 in the evening. The workload was the same, but the peak power was half as much. Kang Ara suggested it. He listened. The city grew, block by block. So Rin designed each house individually. Li Sua helped. She was already drawing her own plans. Not copies. Her own designs. Simple, but sound. Do Hwan signed every blueprint. Architect's name? So Rin. Assistant's name? Li Sua. Li Sua saw her name on the blueprint and ran behind the workshop. Do Hwan heard her laughing back there, or crying, or both. Emily was building a water supply network for the entire city. It was her masterpiece. 3 water wheels on the river, a system of wooden pipes, enough pressure for the water to reach the 2nd floor. Every house had a faucet, every single one. She worked 20 hours a day. Do Hwan told her to go to sleep.
Emily replied in Westmark. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. She wasn't going to sleep until the water system was up and running. The water system started working in the 5th month. Emily turned on the faucet in City Hall. Water gushed out, clean, cold. So Rin cupped her hands. She scooped up some water. She looked at Emily. Emily looked at her. They both smiled. That was the moment when 2 women who had barely spoken to each other became friends, without words. Thanks to the water flowing from the wooden pipe, Han Miran built a clinic on the outskirts of town, a large one, with 10 wards, an operating room, a pharmacy, a chapel. She treated the builders, the living ones, broken fingers, dislocated shoulders, lime burns. But she also began treating residents of the surrounding villages who came to her because they had heard of the priestess healer at Whitebone. Han Miran never turned anyone away. She rediscovered her faith, not in the temple, not in dogma, in the hands that heal. Master Park Jong-il was working on the east wall of City Hall, every day. His masonry became the best on the site, better than the skeletons, better than the young masons. 30 years behind a desk had taken away his speed, but not his skill. He laid the stones slowly, but each stone was set so that not even a hair could be slipped between it and the one next to it. Do Hwan stood nearby and watched. Then he quietly remarked that the east wall of the town hall was the finest masonry he had seen in both of his lives. The master did not ask what both meant. He simply nodded and continued working. In the 6th month of construction, a letter arrived from the Temple of Light. Not from the Inquisitors,
from the archivist, an old monk to whom Father Do Hwan had quietly passed on Do Hwan's request. The archivist sent copies of 3 documents. The first, a decree from 1,000 years ago establishing the caste of bone keepers. It included a full description of their duties: construction, only construction, no weapons, no war. Second, the minutes of a meeting of the Supreme Council of the Temple of Light 900 years ago, at which a decision was made to destroy the keepers. The reason was recorded in the minutes in black and white. The bone keepers were building housing for the poor without the temple's blessing. The temple was losing its monopoly on the consecration of foundations. It was losing money. It was losing power. The third document was the most important. The genealogy of the last known lineage of the keepers, the Chong clan, from the village of Pyeongchon. Hwan read it 3 times. The Chong clan, the village of Pyeongchon, his village, his clan. The boy whose body he inhabited was the last descendant of the bone keepers. The necromancer's mark was not a curse. It was an inheritance, a 1,000-year-old one. The last fragment of an ancient power had awakened in a 15-year-old boy from a village at the edge of the world, and it called, across the threshold of death, the soul of a man who knew how to build. Do Hwan sat with documents on his lap, lost in thought. He had been called, not by chance, not by mistake. He had been called because he was needed, by this world, by these people, by these bones that rose every morning and went to work. Han Mi-ran stood beside him. She said quietly that somewhere deep within the ancient catacombs lay the tomb of the last guardian. That, according to legend, he was waiting for the one who would carry on his work. Do Hwan rolled up the documents, put them away in a folder. He said the catacombs would have to wait. He had a construction project. The city was completed in the 8th month. Peckelson, Whitebone, 400 houses, a school, a clinic, city hall, a market, workshops, a park in the center with trees that So Rin planted herself, sewer system, water supply, straight streets, every house with south-facing windows, with stoves that don't smoke, with roofs that can withstand any amount of snow. The opening day of Peckelson, sunny, warm, a breeze from the south, light. It smells of fresh plaster and pine shavings. People began arriving at dawn, refugees from the southern lands, peasants from ravaged villages, widows, orphans, elderly people who had been turned away from every other city, disabled people whom no one was waiting for. They walked along the road toward the city and stopped at the first houses. They stood and looked. Some touched the walls as if they couldn't believe the stone was real. Do Hwan stood on the town hall porch. To his right was So Rin, a clean shirt. Her hair was tied back, coal dust on her fingers that she hadn't noticed. To the left was Yoon Mei, a new dress, an abacus at her belt. Everything calculated, everything added up. Next to her was Kang Ara, back straight, a magazine under her arm. Slightly behind her was Lee Su-ah in her father's altered jacket with a tube of charcoal behind her back. Han Mi-ran in a white raincoat, clean. No dirt. For the first time in a year. Emily in a stained jumpsuit because she was fixing the faucet at house number 312 until the very last minute. Behind them, 200 skeletons, lined up in neat formation on the square in front of City Hall. Silent, motionless. 200 skeletons who built this city with their dead hands. Do Hwan looked at them, at each one. Grandfather stood first. Old, darkened bones, hands that had fitted thousands of window frames. Next to him was number 7, with a replaced shoulder blade. Number 12 had a pad on his short leg. All 200 of them. He knew each one. He had raised each one. He had spoken words of respect to each one. He had fed each one mana every morning for a year and a half. Count Kwan Sung Ho arrived with his guards. Judge Im Yun Chol arrived on horseback. Baron Nam Gon Du arrived in a carriage because he was old and could no longer ride. Master Park Jong-il came on foot, in a work jacket, with a mason's calluses on his hands. He did not stand beside the nobles. He stood beside the skeletons, in formation. A young monk from the Pure Sky Monastery brought a message from the abbot, a blessing. The temple's first blessing for a building constructed by a necromancer in 1,000 years. Inquisitor Zheng Guan sent a separate letter, a short one. Form up. One word. The residents entered their homes, family after family, house after house. Do Hwan watched. A woman with 3 children went inside and, a minute later, peered out the window, the south-facing one. The sun shone on her face. She was laughing. An old blacksmith entered the house with thick walls next to the forge. He ran his hand along the wall, smooth, warm from the sun. He nodded. He went inside. A girl of about 8, on wooden crutches, entered her house. She and Rin had designed it separately. Wide doors, low thresholds, a ramp at the entrance disguised as a garden path, handrails throughout the house at her height. The girl walked through the house, touching the handrails, just like Grandma Kim and Machan. Only this girl could see. She could see that someone had thought of her crutches, of her height, of her steps. She stepped out onto the porch and looked at Do Hwan across the square. She waved her hand. Do Hwan waved back. So Rin stood beside her, holding her breath. Do Hwan turned to her. She was looking at the city, at her city. Every line she had drawn with a pencil had become stone and tree. Every house she had imagined stood there, breathing and welcoming people inside. She was an architect, a real one. Her name was on every drawing. For the first time in her life, her work was visible. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were moist. Do Hwan quietly said that her project was brilliant, just as he had said on the first day when he saw her drawings by the campfire. So Rin looked at him. She didn't say anything. She just stood there beside him, shoulder to shoulder, just like back then by the campfire, when they'd sat over the drawings at night and she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder. Only now she wasn't falling asleep. She stood there, looking at the city they had built together. Yunmei approached from the other side. She said quietly that all the calculations had come out right, that they were within budget, that there was a profit, that the Whitebone Guild was financially stable for the next 3 years. Then she paused. Then, even more quietly, she said she was happy, that for the first time in her life, she was happy not because of money. Do Hwan looked at her. Yunmei blushed. She turned away. She tapped her abacus with her knuckle, a habitual gesture, a defensive one. Kang Ara stood on the step below, holding a notebook. She was taking notes. The number of occupied houses, the number of residents, names, families, children. She knew everyone, by name, by story. Who came from where, how many children each had, who suffered from what ailments. She was the memory of this city, its conscience. Do Hwan walked down to her. He said quietly that she was tired and needed to rest. Kang Ara looked at him. For the first time, Do Hwan saw her eyes without their usual composure. Soft, warm. She said she would rest later. Right now, she worked to do. Do Hwan nodded. He knew it was useless to argue with her. A cart was making its way down the hill toward the town, slowly. The horse was old. The cart creaked. Do Hwan recognized it before he even saw who was sitting inside. His mother. He'd sent Yunmei to fetch her a week ago, without saying why. He'd simply asked her to come. The wagon stopped at City Hall. His mother got out. A thin woman with cracked hands. Aged, but alive. Do Hwan hadn't seen her for a year and a half. He'd sent money, he'd sent letters, but he hadn't seen her. She stood there and looked, at the city, at the houses, at the smooth streets, at the park, at the skeletons standing in formation, at her son on the town hall steps. Next to 6 women, next to 200 dead workers, next to nobles and masons, next to thousands of people who for the first time in their lives were entering warm homes. She looked at him, and her face was just as he remembered it on that day when he woke up on the straw in the village temple, only without tears. She wasn't crying, she was smiling. His mother approached. She stood before him. She raised her hand. She touched his face. As if checking to see if he was real, she said quietly, "Do Hwan, you're alive. You really are alive." He nodded. Then he took her by the hand. He led her down the street, past the school, past the well, past the park where So-Rin had planted trees, past Han Mi-ran's clinic, past the workshops. To the end of the street, there stood a house, a small one, 1 story, with a front garden, with large windows facing south, with a stove that kept the house warm all night, with an armchair by the window, with a railing on the porch so she wouldn't have to hold onto the wall to climb up, with a separate pantry for dried fish, with a coat hook by the door, with a shelf above the stove for a teapot. Every detail was for her, for the mother who had wept over him at the temple, and to whom he had said he knew what to do. Then Hwan opened the door. He said one word, "Mom." "This is yours." She stepped inside, slowly. She walked across the room. She touched the wall, smooth, warm. She touched the windowsill, wide. You could put a flower pot on it. She touched the armchair by the window, soft, with a cushion. She touched the stove, warm, already heated. Kang Ada had taken care of it. Her mother sat down on the threshold. right on the threshold. Not in the armchair, not on a chair, on the threshold. Just like that day when she was sobbing in the temple. Only now she wasn't sobbing. She was crying quietly, silently. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she was smiling. Do Hwan sat down beside her, on the same threshold, next to Mom. Mom rested her head on his shoulder, just like So-rin had done back then by the campfire. Only this wasn't So-rin. This was the woman for whom it all began. They sat on the threshold in silence, and the sun was rising over the city, slowly, warmly. The morning light fell on the rooftops, on the white bones on the town hall's facade. Decorative ones. So-rin had come up with them. White ribs woven into the stonework, like the ribs of some enormous, benevolent creature embracing the city and refusing to let go. The dead in service to the living, bone and stone, and the people inside. Alive. Finally alive.